I've always believed that the land holds memory. Old wood holds the smell of smoke long after the fire's gone. Some places remember joy, laughter, the warmth of families gathering. But other places remember something darker. And when you camp in those places, when you roll your RV up into the trees and set down your trust in the earth beneath you, you can feel it pressing against your chest, even if you can't name it at first. I was 37 the summer this happened. My wife Marissa and I had been camping for years, mostly out west, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. Wide open skies, desert mesas where the stars fell heavy and bright. But in August of that year, we decided to head north into the pine woods of northern Michigan. She had grown up near there, and there was a nostalgic gleam in her eyes when she suggested it. I thought it would be quiet, less crowded than the national parks. I didn't realize at the time how different the forest would feel compared to the open desert we were used to. Out west, you can see for miles, feel safe in the vastness. But in those woods, the trees press in like they want to listen to your heartbeat. We towed our RV up a narrow 2-lane road that ran beside a lake, so dark it looked like spilled oil. The water had no reflection, no sparkle, just a still surface that swallowed light. Marissa joked that it was a lake without eyes. I laughed with her, but something about the phrase clung to me. The campground itself was small, 6 official sites, each cleared just enough for a picnic table and fire ring. We picked the one closest to the water, tucked back in the trees. The ranger station was closed when we arrived, just a hand-painted board at the entrance with a pay box. We slid the envelope in, wrote our names, and settled in. That first night, everything felt fine. We grilled hot dogs, drank from enamel mugs, and listened to the cicadas. The forest was alive with sound, chirping, rustling, the occasional splash from the lake. It was busy in that comforting way nature often is, like a crowd murmuring in another room. Marissa and I sat by the fire until it burned to embers, then turned in. I remember lying awake in the RV, listening to the night. There's always a moment when you realize how far you are from anyone who could help you. Out there was no cell service, no quick drive to a town, just miles of woods pressing close. Sometime around 2 a.m, I woke to what sounded like knocking. Not sharp or angry, but measured. 3 taps, then silence, then 3 again. I sat up, holding my breath, trying to separate it from the creak of the RV frame cooling, from the sway of branches. But it didn't feel like the woods. It felt deliberate. Marissa stirred beside me but didn't wake. I told myself it was just a tree limb tapping against metal, but when I looked out the window, the nearest branches were still feet away. I didn't go outside. Instead, I lay there, pulse quickening, until the sound stopped. It might have been minutes. It might have been an hour. I don't know. Eventually, I fell back asleep. The next morning, the knocking seemed like nothing. Coffee on the picnic table, mist over the lake, sunlight trickling through the branches. It all erased the night. That's how it works in the woods sometimes. You forget how small you felt when the dark was at your door. We hiked a little trail that wrapped around the lake, spotted a deer moving through the trees, and spent the afternoon reading. The strangeness of the night shrank into something I could file away as nerves. But that evening, as the sky bruised purple and the air grew damp, I noticed something across the lake. The trees on that side stood thick, but between them where the shoreline bent inward, I thought I saw the faint outline of a structure, a roof line. It wasn't a cabin like the ones in state parks either. It looked older, smaller. I pointed it out to Marissa, but she squinted and said she couldn't see anything. Maybe it was a trick of the fading light, she suggested. But the more I stared, the more certain I became. There was a cabin there. That night, the knocking came again. Louder. Still in threes, always in threes. This time it came from behind the RV, not the side with the lake. I froze in bed, straining to hear footsteps, voices, anything human. But there was nothing except those knocks and the thundering of my own blood in my ears. I considered waking Marissa, but what would I say? I think someone's knocking, but I don't know where from. I stayed still, counting the seconds between each set until it finally ceased. By daylight, I searched the clearing. There were no footprints in the soft dirt, no marks on the RV. Just silence, like the forest had swallowed every trace. That afternoon, while Marissa napped, I walked the lake trail alone. My legs carried me further than the day before, around the bend where I thought I'd seen the roofline. And there it was. No trick of the light. There was a cabin. A squat, single-room structure of weathered boards, half hidden behind a curtain of birch trees. Its roof sagged, moss covering the shingles. The windows were black, no glass, just hollow squares. A stone chimney leaned precariously to one side. But here's what made my throat tighten. When I checked the campground, back at the entrance, there had been no structures marked anywhere near the lake. No private property, no hunting cabin, nothing. And yet, here it was, leaning quietly in the shade as if it had always been there. I didn't go closer. Something in me resisted, like an invisible hand pressing against my chest. I turned back, nearly jogging to camp. When I told Marissa, she frowned, said maybe it was a ranger's hut, maybe abandoned. She laughed a little, but I could see unease flicker in her eyes. That night, the knocking didn't come. Instead, it was something worse. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps outside the RV. Not shuffling animal steps, not the light scamper of raccoons. These were slow, heavy, deliberate, human. They circled once, crunching pine needles beneath weight, then stopped at the door. I held my breath, waiting for the handle to turn, but it didn't. Instead, the knocking began again. 3 sharp raps on the metal door. Then silence. Marissa woke this time. She whispered my name, fear tight in her voice. I motioned for her to stay quiet. We sat there, barely breathing as the air seemed to grow colder around us. After what felt like an eternity, the steps moved away, fading into the woods. Neither of us slept again. When dawn finally came, we stepped outside. No footprints, no disturbed dirt, nothing, as though the night had erased itself again. But across the lake, in the pale morning haze, the cabin was gone. The cabin was gone. I stood at the shoreline, staring across that oil-black water, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. I knew where it had been. I could trace the line of trees in my mind like a map, remember the way the birch trunks framed it, the tilt of the chimney. But in the clarity of morning, there was nothing but unbroken forest. No gap in the trees, no roofline sagging into shadow, just endless green, thick and seamless, as though it had never been there at all. Marissa joined me with her mug of coffee, her hair tied back, eyes squinting against the pale sun. "You're sure this is where you saw it?" she asked, her tone light, but with that careful edge you use when you don't want to admit you're worried. "I'm sure," I said. My voice sounded hollow, even to me. She studied the tree line for a while, then shook her head. "Maybe the light fooled you. You were tired, stressed after the knocking. Things look different at night. You know that." I didn't answer, because I wasn't tired when I saw it. I wasn't stressed. I had seen the boards, the chimney, the empty windows, and now it was gone. All morning, I kept glancing back across the water, half expecting the cabin to appear again. It didn't. The forest held itself perfectly still, like it was keeping a secret. We tried to shake it off. We packed sandwiches, hiked a different trail, and spent the afternoon swimming in the lake near the campground's small sandy strip. By evening, with the fire crackling and smoke in our clothes, it almost felt normal again. Almost. But when night fell, the unease came back. It came back in the silence. The forest, which had been so alive with sound before, the chirp of crickets, the hum of cicadas, was dead quiet. The kind of silence that makes your skin prickle because it doesn't belong to nature. Nature is always busy, but that night the woods around our site seemed to hold its breath. We crawled into the RV, both of us pretending not to notice. Marissa tried reading by lantern light, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting. And then, sometime after midnight, it began again. Not knocking this time. Not footsteps. It was a sound I can only describe as dragging. Something heavy being pulled slowly across the ground, circling the RV. The crunch of pine needles mixed with a low scrape like wood or stone. It moved in uneven arcs, stopping and starting, sometimes close, sometimes farther away. Marissa clutched my arm so tightly my hand went numb. I didn't move, didn't breathe. After a few minutes, the dragging stopped. The silence returned, even heavier than before. I thought maybe it was over until we heard the whisper. It was faint, so faint I thought at first it was the wind. A single word, carried on the air, stretched thin. Come. It came from the lakeside of the RV, then a few minutes later from the forest side. Same word, same tone. Not a voice I recognized, not male or female, but something between, like a breath given shape. We didn't sleep at all that night. When morning finally came, I stumbled outside, my nerves raw. Again, no tracks, no marks, no sign of anything moving around us. The only change was the air. It smelled faintly of smoke, like old ash, though no fire burned nearby. I told Marissa we should leave. She nodded without hesitation. But when we packed up and drove toward the entrance, something stopped us cold. The pay board, the one we had dropped our envelope into, was gone. Just gone. In its place was a patch of bare earth, as though nothing had ever stood there. The road stretched empty ahead, but the little wooden structure, the sign, the box, it had all vanished overnight. We looked at each other, panic flickering in her eyes. Maybe we drove the wrong way out, she whispered. But we hadn't. I knew we hadn't. Still, we kept driving. The two-lane road wound through the pines past the lake deeper into the forest. Miles went by and no turnoff appeared. No highway, no towns. Just endless trees pressing close. After nearly an hour, Marissa slammed her hand on the dash. We should have hit Route 12 by now. I didn't answer. My hands gripped the wheel so hard they ached because I had the same thought, the same realization. We were driving, but the road wasn't taking us anywhere. We pulled over on the gravel shoulder, both of us shaking. The forest outside was motionless, as if it were watching. I checked the map we kept in the glove box, an old paper one, marked with campsites and highways. By that map, the road we were on should have ended a dozen miles back. We should have been in town already. But we weren't. When I stepped outside to get air, that's when I saw it again. The cabin. Not across the lake this time, not hidden in trees. It stood right there at the bend in the road, maybe 50 yards ahead, leaning, rotting, its roof sagging. Same cabin, same empty windows, but closer now, waiting. Marissa came out behind me, followed my stare, and this time she saw it too. I felt her grip on my arm tighten, nails digging into my skin. We climbed back in the RV, locked the doors, and just sat there staring at that cabin. It didn't move, didn't change, just stood like it had grown out of the road itself. And then as we watched, the front door creaked open. The inside was nothing but darkness. Marissa whispered, "Don't you dare." She knew the thought crossing my mind, that if we didn't look, if we didn't face it, it might keep following us. But I couldn't move. Neither of us could. We sat there, trapped between running and knowing there was nowhere to run to. From the black of the doorway, the whisper came again. Louder this time, drawn out, trembling. Come. The air inside the RV turned icy. My breath fogged the glass. And for the first time in years, I felt something deep in my chest I hadn't since I was a kid. Not fear, but submission to fear. The helpless certainty that whatever was happening wasn't something I could fight or reason with. It wasn't human. I tried to start the engine. The key turned, but nothing happened. Dead silence. The forest, the road, the cabin, they were all waiting. The silence in that moment was unbearable. Not just quiet, but a kind of pressure, like the air had weight and was pushing down on us, locking us inside that RV. I twisted the key again, praying for the rumble of the engine, but nothing. Just a faint click and then dead air. My stomach sank. Our home on wheels, our escape, was nothing more than a box of metal now. Marissa's breathing was sharp beside me, her hand gripping the dashboard. "Try again," she whispered. I did, harder, longer, my knuckles white, but still nothing. It was as if the whole RV had been drained of life. The cabin door hung open on its rusted hinges, a mouth waiting. The trees seemed to lean toward it, funneling all light into its black interior. The whisper came again, dragging across the air like wet cloth. Come. I felt it behind my ears, inside my chest, vibrating my bones. I wanted to cover my head, shut my eyes, but some darker part of me needed to keep looking, needed to know. Marissa broke first. She grabbed my arm, shaking me hard. We're not going near it. Do you hear me? We stay in here until morning. It'll be gone in the morning. It has to be. Her words made sense, but my gut twisted. The cabin had already proven itself slippery, appearing at night, vanishing by day, and now standing directly in our path. Morning might not mean safety anymore. We sat like that for hours, both of us frozen, our eyes flicking from the open cabin door to the dark woods pressing in. I counted heartbeats, counted breaths, anything to keep from unraveling. At some point, I must have dozed because when I blinked awake, the light had changed. Dawn. The forest was pale with mist. The trees gleamed with dew. Birds sang again, tentatively at first, then in a rising chorus. For a moment, I felt an almost dizzying relief. The world was back. I looked ahead at the road. The cabin was gone. The asphalt stretched on empty, curling out of sight, clean and bare. I shook Marissa awake, my voice cracking. She sat up fast, eyes darting. When she saw nothing ahead, her whole body sagged with exhausted relief. The RV engine roared to life on the first turn of the key. We didn't speak. We just drove fast, as if silence itself might keep the cabin from finding us again. The road bent and bent, the forest thinning, until finally the trees broke open into a strip of farmland. Civilization. A gas station appeared like a miracle. When we pulled in, I almost sobbed. The attendant looked up from his newspaper, and for a strange second, I half expected him not to see us at all, for the RV to be some phantom rolling through a ghost town. But he nodded, walked out, asked if we needed fuel. His voice was so normal, so casual, it nearly broke me. We filled the tank, bought coffee, stood in fluorescent light like people who had survived a storm. We didn't mention the cabin to the attendant. Didn't ask if he'd ever seen anything strange around the lake. I think both of us knew we didn't want to invite the words into daylight. Words make things real. By noon, we were miles away, the road wide and open. Marissa sat stiff in the passenger seat, staring out the window. Her hand kept brushing the inside of her wrist, over and over, like she was checking for a pulse. Finally, she said, "We can't talk about it. Not to anyone. Do you understand?" I nodded. But silence doesn't erase memory. It doesn't stop the knocking from replaying in my head, or the sound of footsteps circling us, or that dragging voice pulling us closer. We tried to go back to normal life. We told friends the trip was fine, beautiful, peaceful. We smiled, showed pictures of sunsets, of the lake sparkling under blue sky. But at night, when I closed my eyes, I could see the open door waiting, the dark inside it spreading like water over everything. Weeks passed. Months. I started to think maybe distance would wear it away. But then, one night in October, long after we'd parked the RV in storage, I woke at 3:07 a.m. to a sound at my own front door. 3 sharp knocks. I froze in bed, every nerve lit up, the past rushing back like it had been waiting for this moment. Marissa stirred beside me, her breath catching in her throat. We didn't move. We didn't speak. When morning came, there was nothing. No one at the door, no footprints on the porch. But across the street, in the neighbor's yard, where their hedge broke for a small gap, I thought I saw the faint outline of a roofline, sagging, familiar. And in that moment I understood. The cabin hadn't been tied to that lake, or to the forest, or even to the RV. It had found us. The outline in my neighbor's yard was faint, so faint I told myself it was a trick of the dark. A roofline, a sag in the middle, 2 windows cut into the black. When I blinked, it was gone. But the silence it left behind pressed on me like a weight. For days after, I tried to convince myself it hadn't been real. I threw myself into work, spent hours in the garage, anything to drown out the creeping thought that maybe the cabin wasn't tied to a place at all. But deep down, I knew. Once you've stood before something that shouldn't exist, you learn the difference between tricks of the mind and truths that don't fit in the world. The next time it showed itself, I wasn't alone. Marissa and I were driving home from her sister's house late on a Friday night. The road was empty, a two-lane stretch cutting through farmland. Headlights caught the thin stalks of corn swaying in the breeze, a peaceful Midwest scene that should have been comforting. She was half asleep beside me, her head tilted against the window when I saw it. There, in the ditch, half hidden by weeds, stood the cabin, leaning like it had been dropped there, wood blackened, roof caving inward. For a heartbeat, the headlights lit up the empty doorway, and I swear I saw movement inside, something shifting in the dark. I slammed the brakes. The RV wasn't with us this time, just my old pickup. Gravel spat out behind the tires as we skidded to a stop. Marissa jerked awake, blinking. "What happened?" I couldn't answer. My throat had locked. I pointed out the windshield, but the ditch was empty, only corn and shadows. She followed my gaze, her face tightening. "You saw it again." I nodded. She didn't argue, didn't say I was tired or seeing things. That told me enough. She'd been dreaming about it too. We drove home in silence. That night, neither of us slept. Every creak of the house, every brush of wind against the siding felt deliberate, like the world outside was waiting for us to close our eyes. Over the weeks that followed, the cabin began appearing more often, never in daylight, never in the same place twice. Sometimes I'd catch it in the reflection of a window, not outside, but layered in the glass, like another world just beyond the pane. Sometimes it was farther, a silhouette on a hilltop while driving at dusk. Sometimes it was closer, too close. One night, I woke to the sound of our dog growling low at the bedroom door. He was a gentle old lab, barely barked at the mailman, but that night he stood rigid, fur bristling. I slid quietly from bed, heart hammering, and pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. No footsteps, no knock, just silence. I cracked the door an inch. At the end of the hallway, where the light from the bathroom nightlight should have pooled against the wall, there was instead a shadow, angled, slanted, a roofline. I slammed the door shut. The dog whimpered, pressed against my leg, trembling. We stayed locked in that room until morning, the both of us breathing like hunted animals. The next day, Marissa broke down at the kitchen table. Her hands shook as she gripped her coffee mug. "It won't stop, will it?" she whispered. "It's not going away." I wanted to lie to her, tell her we'd figure it out, that it was just trauma, stress, something explainable. But the truth sat heavy in my chest. We hadn't just found the cabin, it had claimed us. I started researching, quietly, when she was asleep. Old folklore, native accounts, local legends around northern Michigan. I dug through online forums where campers shared strange stories. Most were hoaxes, campfire tales stretched thin. But here and there, threads appeared. Mentions of wandering houses, cabins that travelers swore they saw where no maps showed buildings. Always at night, always vanishing with daylight, and always preceded by knocking. The descriptions chilled me. People spoke of being followed for years after glimpsing one. Dreams filled with whispering voices, waking to find doorways where there shouldn't be any. Some claimed the cabins were doors themselves, thresholds to something hungry. I stopped reading after that, because the more I read, the more I feared that naming it, describing it, was like giving it permission to grow closer. But the truth is, it didn't need permission. 2 weeks later, we left the house for a weekend in the RV again, not because we wanted to, but because home no longer felt safer than the woods. At least in the RV, we had wheels. We could move. We told ourselves we'd pick a crowded campground somewhere busy, somewhere safe. We chose a state park 3 hours away near Lake Erie. Families were everywhere, kids biking the loops, music spilling from open awnings, the smell of barbecue drifting on the air. For the first time in months, I let myself believe maybe we could escape it. Maybe in the noise and laughter, the cabin wouldn't follow. That night, after the campfire died and the kids around us settled, I climbed into bed, listening to the muffled chorus of crickets. Marissa fell asleep against my shoulder. I closed my eyes, exhausted, almost letting myself drift. Then I heard it. 3 knocks, not on the RV this time, not on the door, but on the window directly above our bed. Sharp, close. I bolted upright, hitting my head against the low ceiling. Marissa woke with a gasp. The window pane was dark, nothing visible beyond it, but the glass was vibrating slightly, as though someone or something still had their knuckles pressed against it. We didn't move, didn't breathe. The sound came again. 3 slow knocks, then silence. But the silence wasn't empty, it was expectant, and through that silence, through the trembling of my chest, I heard it again. That voice, that stretched whisper closer than it had ever been before. Come. It wasn't calling from the woods. It was inside. The words slid through the air like smoke, curling between the walls of the RV. It wasn't outside anymore. It was with us. The whisper didn't echo. It soaked into everything, into the thin mattress beneath us, into the metal frame around the windows, into the air we were breathing. Marissa clutched my arm, her nails biting into my skin. It's in here, she mouthed, not daring to raise her voice above a breath. I nodded, though my throat had sealed shut. My first thought was irrational, almost childlike, to pull the blanket over us, to hide, as if fabric could stop a thing like this. But the sound was already inside the folds of the blanket, already pressing against our skin from the inside out. Then the RV shifted. The whole frame groaned like weight had pressed down on its roof. The suspension dipped, the windows rattled, and for a moment I swore we weren't in a campground anymore. We were sinking into something heavier, something thicker than the earth beneath us. I scrambled to the front, fumbling with the keys. I didn't care if I woke up every camper in the loop. I just wanted the engine running, wanted rubber on asphalt, wanted away. But when I turned the key, the dashboard lights flickered weakly and died, just as they had that night on the forest road. The RV had become a coffin with wheels. Behind me, Marissa whispered my name. I turned. She was staring at the bathroom door. It was closed. We never closed it when we camped. It was just the 2 of us. No need. But now, as I watched, the cheap wood panel shuddered softly, like something was pressing against it from the other side. 3 knocks. Not on the window this time. Not outside. From inside the bathroom. Marissa's face went pale, her mouth open but no sound coming out. I wanted to rush forward, to throw the door open and prove there was nothing there. But a deeper instinct, primal and ancient, screamed not to. Every part of me knew that opening that door meant stepping into the cabin itself, no matter what the space behind it looked like. The knocks came again. Slow, deliberate, and then the handle began to turn. Don't move, I whispered, though my voice broke as I said it. The metal handle squealed, rotating halfway before stopping. Silence followed. Long, suffocating silence where even the night insects outside seemed to freeze. Then came the whisper again. Not from the bathroom this time. From everywhere. Come. The word stretched until it no longer sounded like English, until it was only vibration, a frequency that made the glass tremble and my teeth ache. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did no good. The sound was inside me, in the marrow of my bones. Marissa screamed. I spun back toward her, and the window above the bed was no longer showing the campground. No picnic tables, no other RVs, no trees. It showed the inside of the cabin, blackened walls, a dirt floor, a hearth crumbled into rubble, and in the center of that darkness something moved. Not a person, not an animal, a shape. Angular, wrong, too thin in places and too wide in others. It didn't step forward so much as it unfolded, like a shadow peeling itself away from the boards. I yanked the blackout curtain down with shaking hands, but the image of that room, that shape, was seared into my brain. Don't look, I begged Marissa. No matter what you hear, don't look. We huddled together on the bed, our backs against the wall, waiting for dawn. I don't remember sleeping. I don't remember breathing. I only remember holding her hand so tightly I thought I'd break her fingers, and the endless sound of wood creaking as though the RV itself had grown a roofline, as though the thin metal walls around us were being replaced with logs soaked in rot. When light finally filtered through the seams of the curtains, it was like coming up for air. The RV was still there. The campground was still there. Kids on bikes were riding past. Parents were brewing coffee. But the bathroom door, hadn't touched it. I crept forward, heart in my throat, and peered inside. Nothing. Just the tiny plastic sink, the chemical toilet, the narrow space we'd used 100 times. But the floor was wrong. Instead of linoleum, the whole surface was dirt, dark, damp dirt, pressed flat with a faint smell of smoke and ash. I backed out, slamming the door shut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. Marissa didn't speak. She just packed. We were gone within the hour, tearing down the road like fugitives. I didn't care where we went. I only knew we couldn't stay in that campground 1 second longer. But as we drove, as the miles stacked up, I realized something that made my stomach turn. The cabin wasn't a place anymore. It was a doorway, and it was already inside with us. We didn't stop driving until the sun hung directly overhead, hours past the point where exhaustion blurred the lines of the road. Marissa kept her eyes fixed forward, her knuckles white on her knees, refusing to look out the windows. I didn't ask why, because I was doing the same. Every time my gaze flicked to the side mirror, I half expected to see the sagging roofline gaining on us, tucked neatly into the shoulder of the road like it belonged there. When we finally pulled into a truck stop, the lot buzzing with engines and chatter, we sat in silence. Normal life pressed in around us, families buying snacks, drivers stretching their legs, neon lights humming, and for a moment we could almost pretend we were safe. Almost. Marissa was the first to speak. It's not tied to that campground, or the lake, or the woods. I didn't answer. It followed us into the RV, she said, her voice flat, brittle. And if it can be there, it can be anywhere. Her words weren't a theory. They were a confession. She had seen more than she'd admitted, just like I had. We ate quickly, though neither of us tasted the food, and returned to the RV. Inside, the air felt tight, heavy. I tried to tell myself it was only paranoia, only sleeplessness, but when I opened the bathroom door, the linoleum floor was back, bright, clean, ordinary. Yet when I knelt, when I pressed my hand to it, I swore I could still feel dampness, cool and soft, like soil just beneath the surface. That night, parked among dozens of semis in the safety of the truck stop, I dared to believe maybe the noise, the light, the crowd would keep it at bay. But sleep played tricks. I dreamed of the cabin, not standing alone in the woods this time, but stitched inside other places. It grew out of my childhood home, jutting at odd angles from the familiar porch. It hunched against the hospital where I was born. It pressed against the church where Marissa and I had married. Each memory had a shadow nailed to it now, the cabin's roofline slouching across the frame, and in every dream the whisper chased me. Come. I woke in the dark, throat raw from grinding my teeth. Marissa was sitting up beside me, staring into the rear window. You hear it too? I asked. She didn't answer. I followed her gaze. The glass reflected us faintly in the dim cabin light, but behind that reflection something else layered itself. Not the lot, not the rows of trucks, the cabin's interior again. Closer this time. The hearth, the dirt floor, and in the corner that same shape, waiting. I reached out, yanked the blinds down. My hands shook as I did it. Don't look, I muttered. Don't give it more. Marissa lay back down, eyes wide, face as pale as ash. Neither of us slept again. Days blurred into one another. We drove farther, stayed in motels, sometimes in crowded RV parks, but the pattern followed. The knocks, the dragging sound, the shift of weight overhead. Always at night, always at the same hour, 3 minutes past 3, and the cabin itself, flickering at the edges of windows, mirrors, glass. One evening after we'd stopped at a small-town laundromat, I went to the sink in the back to wash my hands. The mirror above the faucet was scratched and fogged, but clear enough. I leaned forward, water dripping, eyes heavy with sleeplessness. That's when I saw it. Not behind me, not around me, inside the mirror itself. The reflection no longer matched the room. Where there should have been washing machines and detergent bottles, there was only the cabin, its warped boards, its sagging roof, its empty doorway, yawning black, and me, standing inside it. I stumbled back, my head hitting the wall, the mirror cracking slightly under the strain. The reflection snapped back to normal, the hum of dryers, the smell of bleach. But the dirt on my shoes told me it hadn't been only a vision. I ran out to the RV, shaking, my words tumbling. Marissa didn't laugh, didn't doubt. She only put her head in her hands and said, "It's learning." The next days proved her right. The cabin no longer waited for night. I'd catch it in the shimmer of heat rising off asphalt at noon, in the glaze of a store window as we walked past. Once in the sheen of water dripping from a faucet, always fleeting, always gone when I blinked. But each time it was closer, and each time the whisper grew clearer. Come, I began to wonder. What if it wasn't just following us? What if it was already inside us? Not a place at all, but a hunger wearing the shape of wood and shadow, using our own senses as doors. One night after another near-sleepless stretch, Marissa turned to me, her voice ragged. "What happens if we finally say yes?" I didn't answer. Because the real question was worse. What if we already had? I tried to hold on to the ordinary things, the feel of the steering wheel under my palms, the smell of coffee from a gas station's styrofoam cup, the static hum of a local radio station cutting in and out as we rolled through hills and valleys. But no matter how much I clung to the unfamiliar pressed closer. The cabin wasn't waiting at the edges anymore. It was present, like a memory that didn't belong to me, but refused to let go. Some nights, I couldn't even tell if my eyes were open or closed, if I was seeing my surroundings or simply remembering them while standing somewhere else entirely, somewhere with dirt floors and smoke-stained beams overhead. That night in Nebraska, I couldn't take it anymore. We had parked in the corner of a crowded RV park, the kind where kids rode bikes between campsites and people hung laundry on lines strung between trees. Safety, I thought. Proximity. Witnesses. Surely if the knocks came, or the dragging sound, or the sagging creak of a roof pressing down, someone else would hear it too. But midnight came, and the park went silent. A hush fell, as though the whole place were listening for something it didn't want to admit. I lay awake, waiting, my body trembling with anticipation before the first sound even came. 3 minutes past 3. The knock. 1, 2, 3. I sat up, sweat breaking across my forehead, eyes darting to the door. The sound hadn't come from there, not from outside at all. It came from the bathroom. Marissa stirred, whispering, "Don't." But I was already moving. My legs felt hollow, like they didn't belong to me, but some compulsion carried me forward. I opened the door. The small bathroom stretched out into something larger, deeper, darker. The linoleum floor had peeled back like a sheet replaced by damp soil. The walls dissolved into rough planks of wood. The ceiling slouched lower, and I knew. I wasn't looking into the cabin. I was inside it. The air smelled of mildew and old smoke. Cold seeped through my skin like the place had been buried under damp earth for decades. The only light came from the fireplace, though no flame burned there. Just a faint glow that pulsed like breath. Behind me, Marissa's voice cracked. "Come back. Please." But something stronger pulled me forward. The corners of the room seemed to flex as I moved, the cabin bending to watch me. My footsteps were nearly soundless on the dirt, though every beat of my heart seemed to echo against the beams. In the far corner, the shadow waited. At first, it was shapeless, a mass that bent the light around it, like smoke refusing to disperse. But as I drew closer, the lines sharpened, shoulders, arms, the faint outline of a face, though the features blurred, as if smeared across the air. "Why us?" I asked before I realized the words were leaving my mouth. My voice sounded strange, hollow, not entirely my own. The shadow didn't move, didn't blink, but something beneath the silence shifted, an answer forming not in sound but in sensation. "Because you saw me." And suddenly I understood. The cabin wasn't hunting us at random. It had been there long before, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice it, to glance too long into the tree line to recognize the wrongness in its shape. Recognition was the invitation. A door swinging open. Behind me, I heard Marissa's footsteps. Too close, too fast. "No," I whispered. "Stay out." But it was too late. She stepped into the frame of the bathroom door and, like me, crossed over without resistance. Her gasp tore through the silence, catch sharp and panicked, but her eyes never left the shadow. "It knows my name," she whispered, and in the heavy air I heard it too. A whisper, broken and stretched, curling around the shape. Marissa. Her knees buckled and I lunged forward, pulling her against me. The cabin groaned, its beams flexing as though it disapproved. Dust rained down. The shadow leaned closer, its faceless blur elongating toward us. We staggered back, tripping over the uneven floor, dragging each other toward the faint outline of the bathroom doorway. My chest seized with every breath, the air thick as if the place didn't want to let us go. One more step, then another. Then the pull of gravity shifted, and we collapsed backward into the RV bathroom, linoleum firm beneath us. The door slammed shut on its own, rattling in the frame. We stayed huddled there until morning, not daring to move, not daring to open that door again. When light finally poured through the RV windows, the bathroom was ordinary once more. The cracked tile, the faint smell of disinfectant, the small sink. But we knew better. It was no longer about where the cabin was. It was about how close we had already let it come. We tried to pack up the next morning, but our hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every sound in the RV park startled us. The slamming of a screen door, a dog's bark, even laughter. Things that should have been comforting just reminded us how fragile normal life felt. I wanted to cling to the rhythm of the road, to outrun whatever had followed us into that bathroom, but deep down I knew it wasn't behind us anymore. It was inside the path we were walking, waiting at every step. Marissa didn't speak much as we drove. She just sat with her knees drawn up, arms wrapped tight around herself, staring at the reflection of the windows instead of the road. I could see her lips moving sometimes, soundless, like she was arguing with herself, or something else. When night fell, we pulled into a rest stop along the interstate, not because we wanted to, but because I couldn't keep my eyes open. My body screamed for sleep, but my mind refused. The RV creaked as it cooled, every small sound a reminder of beams straining in that impossible cabin. I told myself I wouldn't close my eyes, but exhaustion won. When I woke, Marissa wasn't in bed. Panic surged. I scrambled up, heart hammering, calling her name in a whisper I barely recognized. The bathroom door was open, swinging gently on its hinges. She stood inside, facing the mirror. Marissa? My voice cracked. Her reflection wasn't hers. The mirror showed her, yes, but behind her, just faint enough to mistake for a trick of glass, stood the cabin. Its walls stretched upward into darkness, its roof sagging low over her shoulders, its fireplace glowing faintly. The reflection wasn't bound to her movements either. She lifted her hand, but the cabin stayed still. When her lips parted, the reflection whispered something entirely different, too faint to hear. "I can't stop hearing it," she said, her real voice brittle. "It doesn't sound angry, it just wants me to stay." I pulled her away, snapping the door shut. But the moment it latched, a dull thud reverberated through it. Once, twice, 3 times. The same knock that had followed us since Kansas. This time, the sound didn't come from the outside world. It came from both sides of the door at once. We didn't sleep after that. We sat pressed against each other, waiting for daylight like it might cleanse us. But when the sun rose, there was no relief. Marissa's reflection stayed wrong, even in the daylight. Her eyes would flick in the mirror before she moved. Her mouth would curve into a smile when she wasn't smiling. And when I caught the glass just right, I swore I saw beams over her head instead of the ceiling. By then I knew. We weren't escaping this by moving the RV or crossing state lines. The cabin had unmoored itself from the soil. It was tied to us now. To the split second we noticed it in that clearing. The question wasn't where we could run. It was how long we could resist before one of us answered its invitation completely. That night, I couldn't hold it back any longer. I confronted her. "Marissa, it's in the mirrors. It's in the walls. We have to fight it." She just shook her head slowly, as though I'd missed something obvious. Why fight something that just wants to be remembered? Maybe it's not a curse. Maybe it's a place for people like us, a place that doesn't let you go because it doesn't want you forgotten. Her words chilled me more than anything else, because in them I heard a thread of longing, and I realized her fear had been slowly turning to acceptance. That was the cabin's trap, not terror, not violence, but temptation. She reached for the bathroom door. My hand shot out to stop her, and for a moment I wasn't sure if I was fighting her or fighting myself. Because deep in my chest, under the fear and exhaustion, a piece of me wanted to see it again, too. Her hand hovered over the bathroom door, fingers trembling like she was already halfway between two worlds. I grabbed her wrist, not rough, but firm enough that she couldn't ignore me. Her skin was ice cold, and the longer I held on, the more I felt my own pulse slowing, like the cold was seeping straight into me. "Marissa," I whispered, "don't open it." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time since all this began, I couldn't tell if it was really her looking back. There was a weight behind her stare, something steady and ancient, something that didn't belong to a 28-year-old woman from Denver. "It's not what you think," she said. "It's not trying to hurt us." The RV was dead quiet. Even the highway a mile away had gone silent. The world was holding its breath, listening. "Then what is it?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Her lips parted, and I swear, for an instant I heard two voices overlap. Hers and another, deeper, almost like the low groan of old wood. "A home," she said. That word hit me like a blade, because I wanted it too. Not the cabin, not really, but the promise hidden in her tone. A place where the noise of life didn't reach, where you weren't expected to keep running, where the world didn't forget you. I had been restless for years, even on the road, always looking for something I couldn't name. And the cabin, whatever it was, had sensed that ache in both of us. That's when the knocking began again. This time, not just on the bathroom door. It came from the floor beneath us, the cabinets, the walls of the RV. Slow, steady, unhurried, like the sound of someone tapping a nail into wood, reminding us that the frame of the cabin was always there, waiting to finish itself around us. Marissa leaned closer to the door. Her breath fogged the surface, though the air inside the RV wasn't cold. "Do you hear it?" she whispered, almost reverent. I tightened my grip on her wrist. "I hear it, and I don't care what it wants. It's not ours. We don't belong to it." Her eyes softened, almost pitying. "But maybe we do. Maybe that's why it found us." The door shuddered. Once, twice. I couldn't take it anymore. I yanked her back, forcing her into the kitchen area. She stumbled, nearly hitting the table, and for a split second her face twisted into something furious, something that wasn't entirely her. "Why are you fighting it?" she spat. "Because I'm not ready to disappear," I said, louder than I meant to. My own voice echoed too much, as if the RV had grown larger inside, hollow like the cabin itself. The lights flickered, and in the dark between flickers the walls shifted. Not visibly, but in feel. The air grew heavier, the ceiling pressed lower, and the smell of damp wood filled my nose. When the light steadied, I realized my nails had dug crescent moons into my palms. Marissa's chest was heaving. She looked at me like I was the one who had betrayed her. Then, softer. "If you keep me from it, it'll take you instead." The words weren't hers. I knew that instantly. They slid out of her mouth, too smooth, too rehearsed, like a line whispered through her by something else. The knock stopped, and for a moment, the silence was worse. We sat there, two people trapped in a box on wheels, the night pressing in from outside, the cabin pressing in from within. I realized there was no choice anymore. If I tried to run, it would follow. If I stayed, it would consume us. The only thing left was confrontation. So I made a decision that terrified me more than anything else I'd done on that road. I let go of Marissa's wrist. I walked to the bathroom door, and I opened it. There was no bathroom anymore. The cabin was waiting. The first thing that hit me wasn't sight, but smell. The RV bathroom should have reeked of bleach and travel soap, the way it always did after miles on the road. Instead, the air that rushed out was damp, musty, the kind of wet rot you only smell in places that haven't been opened in years. It carried hints of pine, smoke, and something metallic, iron or blood, I couldn't tell. I froze on the threshold. One step behind me, Marissa inhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours, like the air pouring out of that doorway was exactly what she'd been starving for. I looked inside. The doorway didn't show the tiny sink and toilet anymore. It opened into a narrow hall of rough-hewn timber, walls that leaned inward as if the whole structure sagged under its own age. Shadows swayed where they shouldn't, bending like trees in wind that wasn't there. A lantern hung crooked on a hook, its light dim, but enough to show the warped planks of a floor that went on farther than I could see. I whispered without meaning to. "It's real." Marissa slipped past me, her shoulder brushing mine, and stepped inside without hesitation. Her footsteps didn't echo the way they should have in a hallway like that. They landed soft, muffled, like the wood had been waiting to absorb them. "Marissa." My voice cracked, but she didn't turn. I had two choices: slam the door shut and hope it all vanished with daylight, or follow her into that impossible place and risk never walking back out. I chose wrong. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the RV behind me vanished. I didn't hear the door close. I didn't feel it shut. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. All that remained was the cabin's interior, swallowing me whole. The hallway stretched long and crooked, lined with doorways. Some were cracked open, others sealed tight. The smell of wet earth was stronger now, mixing with the faint tang of smoke, like a fire had once burned here and never fully died out. Marissa moved ahead of me, her hand brushing the walls, tracing the grain of the wood like she was memorizing it. "Do you feel it?" she asked, voice low. "What?" "The pull." I swallowed hard, because I did. Not just a pull forward, but downward, as if the floor beneath me wasn't solid, like the entire cabin was leaning into me, tilting me off balance, asking me to give in. The lantern flickered, and for a second I thought I saw movement at the far end of the hall. A figure. Not clear, not whole, just the impression of someone standing too still in the dim. My heart hammered so loud it drowned out my own breath. "Marissa," I hissed, "we shouldn't be here." She didn't look back. But we are. We passed the first open doorway. I couldn't stop myself from glancing in. It was a bedroom, but not like any I'd seen in the mountains. The bed was made with blankets so old they'd turned brittle. The pillow was stained dark, as if someone had bled into it and left it that way for decades. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing wood beneath that seemed wet. And there were scratches, not just on the walls, but on the floorboards around the bed. Deep, desperate gouges, like someone had been dragged across it, fingernails tearing grooves in the wood until they broke. I staggered back. My shoulder hit the opposite wall. The hallway groaned, the timber flexing like it resented my touch. Marissa had stopped walking. She was standing in the middle of the hall, staring at a closed door. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "This one is mine." I shook my head. "Don't." She laid her palm flat against the wood. The door shivered, as if something on the other side was already leaning against it, waiting. The lantern dimmed again, and in the dark I thought I heard whispering. Not words I could make out, but the cadence of them was wrong. They weren't human whispers. They were too many voices at once, all speaking low, all threading around each other in tones that didn't belong in any language I knew. Marissa began to turn the knob. I rushed forward, grabbing her hand. "Stop! We don't know what's in there." She turned her head slowly, almost dreamlike, and smiled in a way that chilled me more than anything else. "That's the point," she said. The knob clicked. The door swung open, and inside, there was nothing. Not a room, not darkness, just a void. An emptiness so pure it looked solid, like if you leaned too close it would suck the breath right out of your lungs. Marissa stepped toward it. I screamed her name, but the sound didn't echo. It was swallowed whole. I yanked Marissa backward with everything I had. Her wrist felt icy in my grip, like I was holding a branch left too long in snow. For a second, I thought I'd managed to stop her, but then the void moved. It didn't rush, didn't swirl like smoke or fire. It leaned. It tilted out of the doorway like liquid shadow, spilling into the hall without making a sound. The lantern's flame bent toward it, dragged as if pulled by gravity. My chest tightened, my lungs refusing to draw air. Marissa's expression shifted. The dreamy smile faltered, replaced by something I hadn't seen in her since the night we first parked near this place. Fear. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. I nodded, too afraid to speak. The void wasn't just empty, it was hungry. We staggered back, but the hallway wasn't the same anymore. The boards beneath my boots stretched longer than they had a second before, pulling us farther from where we thought we stood. The cabin was breathing, expanding with every second the void grew. "Run," I finally managed. My voice cracked like it was breaking apart in my throat. We turned and bolted. The lantern swung wild in my hand, lights stuttering across doorways that weren't the same as before. A kitchen where there hadn't been one. A staircase that twisted upward into blackness. Windows nailed shut from the inside, each one we passed showing not forest outside, but nothing. A blank expanse, pale as ash. The floor groaned under us, stretching again, keeping us from reaching the end of the hall. Every door we passed seemed to open just slightly, offering glimpses of shapes moving inside. Shadows that bent the wrong way, figures too tall for the rooms they stood in. Behind us, the void was no longer confined to one doorway. It was crawling along the walls like oil, bleeding into the wood, making the cabin groan like it was being hollowed out. Marissa's hand clutched mine, her nails digging so deep I felt skin break. "There," she gasped, pointing. Ahead at last was a door that glowed faintly around the edges. Not lantern light, not sunlight, but something softer, warmer, almost golden. It looked like escape. We threw ourselves at it. My shoulder slammed into the wood, rattling it on its hinges. For a breath, I thought it would hold. Then it gave, splintering inward, and we tumbled through. We landed on hard ground, and when I lifted my head, I wasn't in the cabin anymore. I was outside. The forest stretched around us, dark and silent, the RV parked a few feet away exactly where we'd left it. The night air was sharp and cold, filled with the familiar smell of pine and damp soil. For a long second, I couldn't believe it. We were free. We'd made it out. Then I saw the door. Behind us, standing alone in the clearing, was the cabin's door frame. Not the whole cabin, just the frame, freestanding, ragged with splinters. It stood upright in the dirt like a doorway ripped from its foundation. Through it, I could see nothing but the black void still churning, waiting. And the whispers hadn't stopped. They slipped out of that empty frame in hushed strands, threading into the trees, curling around my ears. Too many voices, too soft to understand, but impossible to ignore. Marissa crawled backward, her eyes locked on the doorframe. "We didn't leave," she whispered. "It left us." The void shivered, and for a split second I thought I saw shapes inside it. Faces pressing forward, mouths open wide, eyes pale and sightless. They leaned closer to the threshold but never crossed, as if bound to the frame. I scrambled up and grabbed Marissa, pulling her toward the RV. "Don't look at it. Don't listen. We just go." But her gaze was fixed, her body trembling in my grip. The golden light I'd thought was escape was still clinging to her skin, faint, like embers cooling after a fire. "Maybe," she said, voice shaking. "It followed us out." I didn't let her finish. I shoved her into the RV, slammed the door, and twisted the lock. But as soon as the deadbolt clicked, the entire vehicle shuddered. Not from wind, not from an earthquake, from something knocking. A hollow, patient rhythm, tapping from the walls. As if the cabin that didn't exist by daylight had found a new shape to wear. And this time, it was ours. The first knock rattled my teeth. Not loud, not violent, just deliberate, measured, as if something knew exactly where we were and didn't feel any rush. Marissa sat frozen in the passenger seat, her face turned toward the RV's side window. I could see her breath fogging against the glass, though the night outside was still and cold. Another knock, this time on the rear. Then another on the roof. My heart slammed against my ribs. I forced myself to move, pacing down the narrow aisle of the RV, palms pressed against the walls like I could somehow feel what was outside. The wallpaper felt damp, faintly warm, like it had absorbed something from the cabin's wood. I whispered, "It can't be real. It can't be real." But then the voices came again, faint, slithering through the thin aluminum walls. Not whispers anymore. Laughter. Low, broken, overlapping chuckles, as if dozens of throats had forgotten how to make the sound, but were trying anyway. Marissa turned to me slowly, her eyes huge and wet. "It doesn't want the cabin anymore." I shook my head hard, grabbing the keys from the dash and jamming them into the ignition. My hands shook so badly I could barely twist them. The engine roared to life, headlights flooding the clearing. But when the light hit the trees, the forest didn't look like the forest anymore. The trunks leaned at impossible angles, roots stretched like veins across the ground, branches curling down as if to block our way. The path we'd driven up, the gravel road that should have been there, was gone, replaced by undergrowth, thick and wet with moss like no vehicle had ever passed through. Marissa pressed her hands to her ears. "It's moving with us," she whispered. I didn't want to hear that. I threw the RV into drive anyway, flooring it forward. The wheels spun in mud before finally catching, jerking us ahead. I aimed the headlights at the thick brush, hoping against hope to see gravel underneath. Instead, something darted across the beam. Not an animal, not a person. A shadow, flat and sharp, as though it had been cut from the dark itself. It moved wrong. No sound, no weight, just a smear of blackness across the light, gone before I could breathe. The laughter outside rose, pressing against the glass, and with it came a new sound, tapping from inside the cabinets, above us, beneath the floorboards. The knocks had multiplied, surrounding us, until it felt like the RV itself had a heartbeat, steady, patient, mocking mine. I slammed the brakes, the RV lurching. My chest heaved, sweat soaking through my shirt. Marissa was whispering something over and over now. I leaned close, straining to hear. She wasn't speaking English. The words slid out of her mouth like water slipping over stones, unfamiliar but practiced, almost like she'd always known them. I grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. "Marissa, stop! Listen to me! Stop!" Her eyes lifted to mine, but they weren't her eyes anymore. They glowed faintly gold, like the edges of that doorway in the cabin. Her lips curved into the same half-smile I'd seen before. "It doesn't want me to stop," she said. Every ounce of blood in my body went cold. The knock stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The kind that makes you realize something is listening, waiting. I tightened my grip on her, trying to hold her here, hold her present. But the glow behind her eyes pulsed, dimming and flaring like it was breathing inside her. And then, in the stillness, a single knock came again, from inside the RV, directly behind me. I didn't turn. Couldn't. Every muscle in me screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The knock came again, closer this time, and the wall at my back groaned, bowing inward as though something unseen pressed from the other side. And Marissa, she was smiling wider now, that golden light spilling across her face like dawn breaking inside her skin. "We shouldn't have left it," she whispered. "We belong where it's dark." I could feel the knock behind me without even turning, its rhythm moving through the RV wall like a pulse. Each strike wasn't just noise, it traveled up my spine, into my jaw, rattling my teeth. It was intimate, invasive, like something tapping on my bones. Marissa's smile stretched unnaturally wide. The glow in her eyes flickered, not steady like a flame, but jerking, like lightning trapped in water. Her voice dropped to a murmur, though I swear it wasn't her speaking. "You brought it with you." My throat locked. I spun around before I could stop myself. The back wall of the RV wasn't a wall anymore. The paneling had softened, sagging inward like wet canvas. It shimmered faintly in the headlight spill, not reflecting but absorbing the light, pulling it into a shape that wasn't right. It looked like a doorway again. Yeah, but this one bled shadows that curled and twisted as they touched the floor. I staggered back, grabbing for anything. My keys, my flashlight, something to anchor me. My hand found the metal edge of the kitchen counter, but it felt damp, sticky, like condensation had been building for hours. Marissa didn't move. She just stared at the dark opening spreading across the wall. See? It followed us. It doesn't matter where we park, where we drive. It always knows where the door is. I wanted to scream at her, tell her to fight it, but my voice caught when the first hand came through. Not flesh, not bone, a shape of black, half liquid, half smoke, pressed forward, stretching long fingers across the ceiling. The nails, if they were nails, left streaks in the fabric overhead as if reality itself could be torn open like old canvas. I lost control. My instincts took over. I lunged for the ignition, slamming the gear into reverse, tires screaming against the mud. The RV jerked, fishtailing, headlights swinging wildly against the trees. But the cabin road, the gravel, the woods, the landmarks I'd trusted were gone. The beams lit nothing but warped trunks, leaning in, bending until the branches scraped across the windshield like skeletal hands. Marissa laughed. Not the hollow laugh of something possessed, but her laugh. Sweet, warm, familiar. And that's what broke me most, because it didn't fit. It didn't belong here. "Stop," she whispered. "It's not letting us go. Don't you see? You're just tearing the world in circles." I pressed the pedal harder, and engine screaming, metal rattling like the whole RV would fall apart under me. The doorway in the back wall pulsed brighter, spilling a strange golden glow across the ceiling, filling the space with that humming static we'd first heard in the cabin. And then a shape moved across the windshield. At first I thought it was a deer, or maybe a person caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But as the light passed over it, the figure didn't have a face, just the outline of one, flat, unfinished, like it hadn't decided what it was supposed to be. I swerved hard, my shoulder slamming into the driver's side window. Marissa screamed, not in fear, but in anger. "You'll crash us! Don't you understand? It doesn't care if we live or die as long as we go back." The word "back" hit me like a hammer. My chest seized with the memory of that cabin hallway, the warped shadows, the doorway that wasn't there by daylight. I couldn't let it take her. I yanked the wheel again, forcing the RV straight, refusing to look at the wall behind me, though I could feel the glow burning into the back of my skull. "Marissa," I gasped. "Fight it, please. Just fight it." Her smile faltered. For the first time, the light in her eyes flickered like a candle caught in wind. It's not me." The black hand from the doorway stretched farther, curling down toward her shoulders, reaching. I slammed my palm against the horn, holding it down, filling the night with one long blaring scream of metal. The sound seemed to tear through the static, cutting it for a moment. Marissa's body jerked as though waking from a dream, and she sucked in a ragged breath. "Keep going," she cried suddenly. "Don't stop! Just don't stop!" I didn't need telling twice. The RV tore forward, branches clawing across the glass, something heavy slamming onto the roof, dragging across it in long, scraping pulls. The horn blared, the engine roared. The headlights cut through a world that looked less like forest and more like a shifting maze of shapes. The golden glow at my back pulsed faster, harder, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat, until I couldn't tell if it was chasing us or if it had already found a way inside. And then the worst thing happened. I looked in the rearview mirror. The reflection didn't show the back of the RV. It showed the cabin, whole, waiting, lit with that impossible light. The mirror wouldn't let me look away. The cabin loomed in its glass, whole and waiting, as if my rearview had become a window into some place we'd already left, but could never escape. Its roofline cut across the reflection with sharp precision, the glow from its windows bending the inside of the RV in angles that made my stomach lurch. I blinked hard, forcing my eyes back to the road ahead. But the road wasn't a road anymore. It was a narrowing tunnel of trees, their trunks leaning, bending till bark scraped the sides of the RV like nails against a coffin lid. I wanted to scream. Instead, I clenched my jaw and drove harder. The horn was still pressed under my palm, one long, unbroken sound until my arm trembled with the effort. The sound didn't just fill the night. It cut into me, kept me anchored. Beside me, Marissa clawed at her temples, eyes shut tight, whispering something over and over. At first, I thought it was nonsense. Then I realized it was the only thing she had left. "We're not going back. We're not going back. We're not going back." Her voice was cracked, but it steadied me. The glow in the back of the RV flared one last time, swelling until every shadow warped, stretched long, clawing toward us. The hum rose, a pressure so sharp in my ears that my vision went black around the edges. For a heartbeat, I thought the RV would fold into that doorway, sucked into the place behind the mirror. And then, silence. The glow was gone. The branches fell away from the windshield. The pressure lifted. We burst out onto gravel, then onto asphalt. My headlights hit a faded road sign, and my chest nearly collapsed with the relief of it. County Road 14, 2 miles to interstate. Real road. Real pavement. Real world. I didn't let go of the wheel, not even when Marissa sobbed into her hands. Not even when the horn went quiet beneath my shaking palm. I kept my eyes on that road, watching every bend, every mile marker, waiting for the forest to twist again, waiting for the cabin to return. But it didn't. By the time we reached the interstate, the RV rattling like it had been torn apart and stitched back together, the sun was beginning to rise. Morning crept across the horizon in pale gray bands, bleeding into blue. It was the ugliest, most beautiful sunrise I had ever seen. Only when the highway opened up in front of us, stretching wide and clean beneath the daylight, did I finally pull over. I killed the engine. My hands stayed locked to the wheel long after. Marissa was curled against the passenger door, her breathing shallow but steady. She wouldn't look at me. She just stared at her hands like she didn't know if they were still hers. We sat in silence, letting the trucks roar by on the interstate, until the sun finally climbed clear over the tree line. And in the daylight, there was no cabin. There never was. Just a stretch of woods behind us, fading in the rear view, ordinary and dull. I wanted to believe that meant it was over, that the thing was tied to that place, that once the night broke, so did its hold on us. But when I closed my eyes, I still saw it. The doorway glowing in the back wall of the RV, the cabin reflected in the mirror, waiting. It's been months since that night. We sold the RV. Marissa hasn't set foot in the woods again. She doesn't even camp anymore, not even in daylight. I can't blame her. But me? Sometimes when I drive at night, even just down some empty county road, I catch myself checking the rear view. I tell myself it's just habit. I tell myself I'm being cautious. But the truth is, I'm waiting. Because I know what I saw. And I know places don't just vanish because the sun comes up. Somewhere out there beyond the edges of the map, that cabin still stands. A cabin that doesn't exist by daylight. A cabin that waits for dark. And I know, sooner or later, it'll find its way back. I've told myself 100 different versions of what happened that night, tried to frame it in ways that would make sense. Some mornings I wake convinced it was just fatigue, my mind folding shadows into shapes it needed to see. Other days I remember the heat of the hum in my skull, the feel of the RV groaning as if pulled toward another world, and I know there was nothing imagined about it. But the part that still sticks with me, the part that rattles me awake when I hear tree limbs tapping the window at night, isn't the cabin itself. It's how easily I almost ignored the warning signs. How quickly I rationalized the first off thing, then the second, then the third, telling myself we were tired or lost or seeing tricks of the firelight. I wanted to believe those lies because the truth was harder. We weren't safe, and we were already caught in something we didn't understand. When I look back, I realize survival didn't come from being strong or clever or even brave. It came from one thing only, listening to instinct when everything else tried to drown it out. That tightening in your gut when something's off, that prickle on your neck when the woods go silent, that urge to leave before you can explain why. That's not weakness. That's the part of you built for survival, older than reason, older than language. Ignore it, and you invite the dark to close in. Respect it, and you just might live to see morning. Camping out there in the wild, whether you're in a tent under a starry sky or in the walls of an RV parked at some lonely campground, you owe yourself that respect. Because the wilderness doesn't care how confident you feel. Night doesn't care how much gear you've packed. And whatever waits in the corners of silence, in the places that maps don't bother to mark, it certainly doesn't care if you're ready. That night, the woods taught me something I'll never forget. Danger doesn't always look like danger. Sometimes it looks like a warm cabin in the trees, a light when you're lost, an answer when you're desperate. But the things that promise comfort without reason, the things that appear only when you're most vulnerable, those are the ones you should fear most. So if you take anything from me, Take this. When you're out there under the weight of the sky, trust yourself. Trust your instincts more than the trail map, more than the voice of a stranger, more than the glitter of lights in the woods. Because not every shelter is meant to keep you safe. Not every door should be opened, and not every cabin will be standing when the daylight comes. I don't know if the cabin is still waiting for me or if it moved on to someone else. Maybe you. Maybe the next camper who sets up a fire just far enough from the road. All I know is that I won't ignore the signs again. And if you're smart, if you want to keep yourself and the people you love alive out there, you won't either. The night will always whisper. The woods will always hide things older than we can understand. But morning still belongs to those who listen. And if you listen, really listen, you'll make it back. And you'll never forget what waited for you in the dark. I've always said that Oregon is a place that doesn't forgive mistakes. When you're behind the wheel of an RV with the mountains on one side and the dark press of forest on the other, a wrong turn isn't just an inconvenience. It can be the difference between finding a quiet lakeside pullout or disappearing into a stretch of road that doesn't lead where you think it does. And I should have known better. I should have trusted the unease in my stomach that day, the subtle shift in my own voice when I told myself everything was fine. But Oregon has a way of humbling people who talk themselves into ignoring warning signs. It started in late October, the kind of month where mornings in the Cascades bleed frost and the air smells faintly of pine needles dissolving into the wet soil. My partner Amy and I had planned a week-long trip through some of the lesser-known campgrounds north of Crater Lake. She's 32, I'm 35. We've been doing this for years, Volkswagen campers at first, then we finally upgraded to a 20-foot RV that could handle longer trips. We weren't rookies, but the land doesn't care about your mileage. Out there, you're either paying attention or you're already in trouble. The road that led us wrong didn't even look suspicious at first. It was paved, marked on the GPS, even had a brown forestry sign with an arrow pointing toward a designated campsite. We were chasing the last 2 hours of light, hoping to set up before the kind of mountain dark that comes down like a curtain. I remember Amy rolling down the window to take in the cold air, her breath already visible. She said, "This feels good. Remote, but good." I wanted to believe that. I wanted her comfort to be my comfort. So I ignored the small things, the fact that the sign was weathered to the point the lettering looked scratched out, or that my GPS map showed the road narrowing and breaking into gray nothingness after 5 miles. The asphalt turned to gravel to dirt, and then the dirt became something else entirely. A mix of moss, wet clay, and fallen leaves that gave under the tires in a way that felt more like sinking than driving. The trees closed in. Big Douglas firs leaning toward each other, their branches knitting together so tightly that the evening light filtered through in fractured, jagged stripes. The sound of our tires was louder than it should have been, like we were trespassing somewhere the road itself didn't want us. I thought about turning back. I almost did, but Amy was humming softly, looking out at the slivers of orange light through the treetops, and I told myself we were just pushing deeper into a forest that most people never bothered to see. Then the road forked. No warning, no mention on the map, just a sudden Y in the dirt, left or right. Both paths looked equally worn, equally abandoned. My headlights caught something on the tree where the road split, a crude arrow carved into bark, pointing left. My stomach dropped. Signs like that don't appear for no reason. They're not official, they're not helpful, they're warnings or lures. But I wanted so badly to make progress, to not disappoint Amy, that I followed it. And the instant we took the left road, the forest felt different. The air cooled sharply, as if we dropped 1,000 feet in elevation. Condensation gathered along the windshield, thick enough that I had to run the wipers every few seconds. Amy said it smelled green like wet moss and iron, like the air was alive. The further we drove, the quieter it became. No birds, no insects. Even the sound of our tires softened, like the earth was swallowing the noise. And somewhere in the back of my head, I remembered a ranger once telling me, "The forest tells you what's wrong by what it doesn't say." I didn't want to admit how uneasy I was, so I rationalized it out loud. "It's just off-season," I told her. "Animals are deeper in the woods, that's why it's quiet." But my voice shook when I said it, and Amy noticed. She asked if I was okay. I lied and said yes. That's how fear takes root. It starts with one lie you tell yourself, and then another. We drove another mile before we saw it. The road ended in what looked like a clearing, but it wasn't a campground. It was more like an old lot, overgrown and forgotten. There were the remains of fire rings made from piled stones, but inside them, no ash, just damp soil as if no fire had burned there for decades. A collapsed picnic table, its wood dark with rot, sat at the edge of the clearing, and behind it, a line of wooden posts with faded numbers painted on them, each one leaning, almost unreadable. Campsites, once, but long abandoned. I parked anyway, because the truth was, we had no choice. Turning back in the dark on that road, with no clear idea of where we'd gone wrong, felt more dangerous than staying put. That's how fear tricks you again. Makes you think standing still is safer. We set up camp in silence, both of us trying too hard to act normal. Amy cooked a quick dinner on the stove while I walked the perimeter of the clearing with a flashlight. Every tree looked the same. The beam of my light seemed to dissolve faster than usual, swallowed by the dark between the trunks. And more than once, I thought I saw movement, something shifting just beyond the circle of light, too fast to track, too deliberate to dismiss as imagination. My chest tightened. I forced myself to keep walking, counting each step, grounding myself in the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. That's the only way I didn't lose it completely. Later, after dinner, we sat outside for a while, trying to salvage some sense of calm. The fire we built hissed constantly, damp wood refusing to catch properly. The smoke clung to us, heavy and acrid, leaving a bitter taste at the back of my throat. Amy leaned into me and said she felt watched. She didn't say it like a joke, she whispered it like a confession. And when I asked her why, she only shook her head, eyes darting toward the tree line. That was the first time I realized I wasn't alone in my unease. When we finally climbed into the RV, the night pressed in so hard that the windows might as well have been painted black. I locked every door twice. I pulled the curtains tight. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that someone or something was standing just on the other side of the thin aluminum walls, listening to us breathe. Amy fell asleep after a while, her breathing deep and steady. I stayed awake, listening, and that's when I heard it. A knock, soft, deliberate, against the side of the RV. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. My whole body froze. I wanted to believe it was branches swaying in the wind, but there was no wind. I wanted to believe it was an animal, but animals don't knock like that. They don't pause between sets like they're waiting for you to respond. I didn't wake Amy. I couldn't, because waking her meant admitting it was real. Instead, I lay there in the dark, every nerve in my body on fire, waiting for the next knock. And when it came, slower this time, closer to the window by our bed, I finally understood. Oregon doesn't forgive wrong turns. It doesn't let you forget them either. I didn't sleep that night. Every time my eyes grew heavy, another sound came. Sometimes it was that same measured knock, like fingertips or knuckles testing the walls. Sometimes it was footsteps, faint and careful, circling the RV. And sometimes it was nothing at all, just the silence so heavy that my mind filled it with the expectation of noise, a silence that seemed to lean against the windows and press on my chest. By dawn, I was exhausted, but more than that, I was convinced we weren't to be there. When the first thin gray light began to cut through the curtains, I slipped out of bed, trying not to wake Amy. She stirred anyway, her eyes opening just enough to register the look on my face. "You heard it too," she whispered. It wasn't a question. She knew. And that broke something inside me, because it meant I wasn't imagining it. We stepped outside together, both of us bracing for what we'd see. But the clearing looked almost normal. Damp, cold, empty, except for one thing. In the mud beside the RV were marks. Not boot prints, not paw prints, just indentations that looked like someone had pressed the ends of long fingers into the earth, dragging them slowly, deliberately. They curved around the vehicle, looping like someone had been pacing, tracing us all night. Amy grabbed my hand so hard her nails cut into my skin. She didn't say anything, and neither did I. Words would have made it too real. We packed quickly. Every sound, the slam of a cupboard, the hiss of the stove as I turned off the propane, felt too loud, like it might call something back. I started the engine and steered us toward the clearing's exit. Relief washed over me when I saw the fork in the road again, as if just returning to that point would undo everything. But when we reached it, my stomach lurched. The carved arrow in the tree was gone. The bark was smooth, as if it had never been there at all. I don't know why I chose the right path this time. Maybe instinct, maybe desperation. But the road we took didn't look familiar. It twisted harder, the trees hanging lower, moss dripping from every branch like wet curtains. The air had that same metallic smell, like rust and earth. And the GPS, when I tried to pull it up, the screen froze. A single blue dot pulsing in the middle of gray emptiness. Then it blinked out completely. After an hour of driving with no signs, no landmarks, the unease hardened into dread. Amy stayed quiet, staring out the window, her reflection pale against the glass. I finally broke the silence. We should have never taken that left. She turned to me, eyes hollow. We should have never taken this road at all. The road ended again. Another clearing, but this one wasn't abandoned. It was wrong in a different way. There were signs of people, but no people. A fire pit with charred wood that was still warm, embers glowing faintly. A line of folding chairs arranged in a perfect circle, their fabric damp with dew, and on a stump in the center, a lantern still flickering. But there was no one around, not in the trees, not in the shadows, no cars, no tents, nothing but the evidence of presence. Amy refused to get out. She clutched the seatbelt across her chest like it was the only thing tethering her to safety. I stepped out anyway. I don't know why. Curiosity, or maybe the belief that answers would make this less terrifying. The ground was soft beneath my boots, like it had rained harder here than anywhere else. The chairs were all facing inward, toward the stump, as if waiting for something. On the wood next to the lantern lay a stack of papers weighed down by a stone. I lifted the stone and unfolded the top sheet. It was a map. Hand-drawn, crude, the lines jagged like they'd been sketched in haste. It showed a road that wound in loops, spiraling inward toward a center marked with a black X. At the edge of the page, in smeared ink, someone had written, "Never take the left road." My blood turned to ice. I staggered back toward the RV, my breath coming fast. Amy rolled down the window, panic etched across her face. "What is it?" she asked. I crumpled the paper in my fist and shook my head. "We need to leave. Now." Because saying what I'd read out loud felt like handing it power. I turned the ignition again, drove us back the way we came. But the forest was no longer the same. Landmarks shifted. The bends in the road didn't match what I remembered. The trees seemed closer, taller, their branches arching overhead until they blocked out the light. The GPS was dead. My phone had no service, and even the compass app spun aimlessly. It was as if the forest had swallowed every direction but the one it wanted us to take. By midday, we were hopelessly lost. Amy was trembling, her hands twisting in her lap. She kept saying we should stop, that maybe staying put would be safer than circling endlessly. But the thought of turning off the engine, of letting the silence take hold again, filled me with raw fear. If we stop, I told her, we won't start again. I didn't even know what I meant, but it felt true. The trees finally broke into another clearing just as the sun began to sink. Relief surged through me until I saw it. My chest collapsed. Because it wasn't a new clearing. It was the same one as before, the same fire pit, the same circle of chairs, the same stump with the flickering lantern. Only this time, the lantern wasn't lit, and the stack of papers was gone. Amy began to cry then, quietly into her hands. I held her, but my eyes stayed fixed on the tree line, because I could feel it. Whatever had been pacing us the night before, whatever had marked our RV with those finger-like impressions, it was here again. Watching. Waiting. The wrong turn hadn't been about a road at all. It was about entering a place that doesn't let go once it has you. That night, we didn't cook. We didn't build a fire. We sat inside the RV with the curtains drawn, lights off, listening. And the sounds came back. The knocking, deliberate and steady. The footsteps circling, dragging against the earth. Once there was even a voice, or something like a voice. A whisper just outside the window, too muffled to understand, but close enough to rattle every nerve. Amy pressed her hands over her ears, rocking gently, whispering to herself, "We're not supposed to be here. We're not supposed to be here." I couldn't argue, because she was right. Around 3 a.m, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the keys, started the engine, and floored it. Branches scraped against the sides, the headlights flashing over endless trunks, the road twisting in impossible directions. Amy clutched the dashboard, sobbing, begging me to stop. But stopping wasn't an option. Not while the knocks grew louder, sharper, like something was striking metal. Not while the whispers followed us, threading through the engine's roar. And then the road spat us out. Just like that. We broke through the trees and onto asphalt, a familiar 2-lane highway with faded yellow lines and a road sign pointing toward Bend. I slammed the brakes, chest heaving, sweat dripping down my back. Amy and I sat there in stunned silence, both of us afraid to breathe, afraid the forest might realize it had let us go by mistake. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw nothing but black. No road, no clearing, no fork, just the night, thick and impenetrable, as if the path we'd taken had vanished the moment we left it. We didn't talk for a long time after that. The tires hummed against the highway, and the dashboard glow was the only light. Amy stared straight ahead, pale, her eyes wide and hollow. I gripped the wheel so hard my hands ached. There's something about surviving a night like that. You don't celebrate, you don't even breathe relief. You just sit in the heavy aftermath, waiting for whatever still clings to you to finally let go. And in my gut, I knew it hadn't. We pulled into a rest area near dawn. It was one of those tiny pullouts with a single bathroom hut and a couple of vending machines under flickering lights. A semi idled in the corner, its driver asleep inside. Ordinary, almost comforting. I thought maybe this would be enough, that asphalt and electricity would break whatever grip that forest had on us. We locked the doors, collapsed onto the bed, and fell asleep without speaking. But the sleep wasn't restful. I woke 2 hours later, drenched in sweat, my throat raw from shouting in my dreams. Amy jolted awake too, gasping like she'd been underwater. When our eyes met, we didn't have to compare notes. We'd both seen it. The same dream. The same circle of chairs, the same flickering lantern. Except this time, the chairs weren't empty. Shapes sat in them, tall, thin figures with their faces turned away, all watching the stump in the center. And when the lantern went out, every head turned toward us at once. Amy grabbed my arm. "We're not safe yet," she whispered. Her voice cracked. She looked at the vending machine, its lights buzzing, and shook her head. "Even here, it followed us." I wanted to argue, to tell her it was just our minds playing tricks after a night of stress, but the words stuck, because I knew she was right. Something from that road had seeped into us, carried itself forward. You can drive out of a forest, but you can't always leave what waits inside it. We decided to push on anyway. Bend was still hours away, and the plan was simple. Get into town, find a proper campground, surround ourselves with people, lights, noise, safety in numbers. I clung to that thought as the highway stretched on, the landscape flattening into scrubland before lifting again into rolling hills. But every mile I drove, I felt it, that faint tug at the back of my skull, like a compass needle pulling towards something unseen. Around noon, the fuel gauge dropped low. I spotted a faded sign for a small town, one of those half-forgotten places that clings to a highway but no longer thrives. We exited, rolling down into cracked streets lined with shuttered shops and peeling paint. A single gas station stood at the far end, its windows dirty, its pumps old. I pulled in, and the silence of the town pressed heavy. While I filled the tank, Amy went inside to use the restroom. I stood there with the pump in hand, staring at the reflection of our RV in the gas station window. For a moment, my breath caught. In the glass, the RV didn't look right. The curtains weren't drawn the way I knew they were, and in the back window, I thought I saw movement, like someone shifting just out of sight. I whipped around, heart hammering. Nothing. Just our RV, silent and still. When Amy came back out, her face was pale. "The bathroom mirror," she whispered. "It didn't show me. It showed the chairs, the same ones." We left without paying for snacks or water, driving fast out of town, out of reach of its rotting silence. Neither of us spoke. We couldn't. Words would only make the horror more solid, give it shape and permanence. That evening, we pulled into a campground on the edge of a lake. Families were there. Kids running, dogs barking, smoke rising from fire pits. The sound of laughter felt like salvation. For the first time in days, Amy smiled, though it was thin and trembling. We parked between two other RVs, close enough that their porch lights spilled faintly across our sight. For the first time, I let myself believe maybe we'd finally escaped it. We cooked over the stove, ate quietly, and walked down to the water's edge. The lake was calm, the surface like glass. The reflection of the tree line rippled faintly in the breeze. But as I stared, my stomach flipped. The reflection didn't match. The trees in the water leaned at sharper angles, their branches too dense, their darkness too thick. And in the reflection, the far bank glowed faintly, like lantern light, pulsing. I blinked hard, looked away, and forced myself to focus on the real shoreline. Empty. Quiet. Normal. But when Amy slipped her hand into mine, I felt how cold her fingers were. She had seen it too. That night, I convinced myself we'd be okay if we stayed surrounded by people. But after midnight, when the campground had quieted and the last embers dimmed, the knocking came again. Soft, deliberate against the RV wall. My blood turned to ice. I froze, counting the knocks. 3, a pause, 3 again. Exactly as before. Amy sat up in bed, tears streaking down her cheeks. "It doesn't matter where we go," she whispered. "It always finds us." The next morning, I checked outside. No tracks this time, no finger marks in the dirt, just the ordinary trappings of a busy campground. And yet I couldn't shake the certainty that the road had left something inside us, something that didn't need tracks anymore. We tried to keep going. Another day, another push north. The plan was to reach Portland, find a hotel, abandon the RV if we had to. But just outside of Sisters, it happened again. The GPS flickered to life for the first time in days. A thin blue line appeared on the map, leading off the highway, and in the corner of the screen where road names should have been, 3 words glowed in static text: "Left road ahead." Amy screamed, grabbed the phone, and threw it against the dashboard. The screen shattered. The line vanished. But the words burned into my mind, heavy as stone. We weren't lost anymore. We were being guided. By evening, exhaustion crushed us. We pulled over at another rest stop, surrounded by the hum of trucks and the glow of fluorescent lights. I told myself we'd be safe here, that nothing could touch us with so many people around. But when I stepped into the bathroom, I froze. The stall doors stood open, each one perfectly aligned, and on the wall above the sinks, carved deep into the tile, were the same words: "Never take the left road." I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. Someone had been here before us. Someone had tried to leave a warning. And I realized then that we weren't unique. The forest had taken others. The forest had rules. When I returned to the RV, Amy was asleep, her face pale but calm for once. I stood by the window, staring out into the night, waiting for the next knock, because I knew it was coming. And sure enough, it did. 3 taps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the thin metal walls. Only this time it came from the roof. The knocks on the roof came in steady intervals, like a metronome marking the seconds of our fear. I froze, holding my breath, my eyes darting up as if I could see through the ceiling. Amy stirred, blinking awake, and the moment she realized what was happening, She clutched my arm so tightly her nails dug crescent moons into my skin. "Don't move," I whispered, though the words felt hollow. Because movement wasn't the issue. It was the fact that something had followed us across miles of highway, across towns and rest stops, and it had found a way onto the roof. The tapping stopped. Silence pressed in, thicker than the metal walls. And then came a dragging sound, slow and deliberate, as if long fingers were being pulled across the aluminum skin of the RV. From front to back to front, over and over, tracing us, mapping us. Amy began to cry, softly, muffled against her sleeve. I wrapped an arm around her, but my own body shook with terror. I thought about stepping outside, about confronting whatever was up there, but the thought dissolved the moment it formed, because deep down I knew it wasn't something I could face. Not like that. Not on equal ground. The roof creaked faintly, like weight shifting. Then the silence came again, a silence that felt more dangerous than the sound. We waited, every nerve straining for the next noise. It never came. Eventually, exhaustion dragged us back into a shallow, haunted sleep. When morning came, I climbed out with a ladder I'd bought months earlier for roof cleaning. My hands trembled as I extended it, every step upward feeling like an invitation for disaster. But when I reached the top, the roof was empty. No dents, no scratches, just dirt, leaves, and the faint condensation of morning. If not for Amy's tear-streaked face staring up at me from below, I might have convinced myself it hadn't happened at all. We didn't linger. By noon, we were back on the highway, racing west toward Portland. The thought of crowds, of city lights, of sheer human noise was the only thing keeping us sane. But Oregon had other plans. The highway split near a junction, and for a brief second, the GPS in the dashboard flickered back on. I didn't touch it. Amy didn't either, but the screen lit up anyway, the map zooming without our input, pulling into an unfamiliar stretch of road that curved sharply left, and across the screen, in jagged, glitched letters, the words appeared again, "Left road ahead." I swerved, nearly missing a semi in the next lane. Horns blared, brakes screeched. But I forced us straight, refusing to give in. The screen blinked out again, dead black. My hands shook against the wheel. Amy was sobbing, whispering over and over, "It won't let us go. It won't let us go." By the time we reached Portland, night was already creeping in. The city felt like a fortress, its lights glaring against the dark sky. We checked into the first hotel we could find, abandoning the RV in the lot. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet, but it was safe, at least safer than the metal coffin we'd been dragging across Oregon. For a few hours, it almost worked. The hum of traffic, the shuffle of footsteps in the hall, the comfort of walls thicker than aluminum, all of it lulled us into a fragile calm. We ordered food, ate in silence, and crawled into bed, hoping the city's density would shield us. But sometime after midnight, the phone rang. An old landline, sitting by the bed. Amy startled awake, staring at it with wide eyes. I hesitated, every instinct screaming not to answer. The ringing went on, relentless, until finally, with a trembling hand, I picked up the receiver. Static hissed in my ear. Then faintly, beneath the crackle, a voice. Not one, but many. Overlapping whispers, murmuring in unison. I couldn't make out the words at first, but then they rose, sharpened, and the message cut clear. "Take the left road." I slammed the phone down, my chest heaving, bile burning in my throat. Amy curled into herself, sobbing into the blanket. "It found us here too," she whispered. I didn't argue. I couldn't, because the truth was undeniable. The next morning, I tried to convince her we should leave Oregon entirely, head south into California or north into Washington, cross the border, put distance between us and whatever hunted us. She nodded, silent, her eyes empty. We packed what little we had into the RV and hit the highway again. But Oregon doesn't forgive wrong turns, and it doesn't let you forget them. We hadn't even cleared the city when the signs began. Not GPS, not whispers, physical signs. Hand-painted boards nailed to trees along the roadside. Left road ahead. Some scrawled in red paint, some in black, all crooked, all staring at us as we passed. Amy pressed her hands over her eyes, rocking back and forth. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. And then came the fog. It rolled in heavy, swallowing the city lights behind us, reducing the world to a tunnel of gray. The headlights cut only a few feet ahead, the road vanishing into mist. My chest constricted. Because this wasn't normal fog, it had weight, density, almost texture. The air inside the RV grew damp, clinging to my skin, to my lungs. Amy coughed, which I slowed, praying the fog would break, but it only thickened. Out of the mist, a shape appeared. A sign, brown wood, official-looking, with carved letters. Campground ahead, 2 miles. Relief sparked for a second until I saw the smaller sign nailed beneath it. White paint, jagged strokes, left road. My vision blurred. My pulse thundered. I wanted to turn back, to drive straight into the fog until it spat us out somewhere, anywhere. But the road curved sharply and the RV groaned as it tilted left. Amy screamed. I hit the brakes, tires screeching against wet asphalt, the RV lurching to a stop. The headlights cut across the trees, illuminating a dirt path leading off the highway, the left road. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The engine idled, low and rough. The fog hung heavy, swallowing sound. And then, from the darkness of that path, a lantern flickered, a warm golden glow, beckoning. Amy shook her head violently, tears streaming. She pleaded, "Please, don't." I wanted to listen. God, I wanted to. But as I stared at that lantern, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't just a lure, it was familiar. The same lantern from the stump in the clearing, the same light from our dreams. Somehow, impossibly, it had followed us here. The engine sputtered once, twice, then died. The headlights dimmed, the fog pressed tighter, and the knocking started again. Not on the roof this time, on the windshield. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more. Amy screamed. I grabbed her hand, and for the first time since we'd taken that cursed left road, I admitted the truth out loud. We can't escape it. The windshield fogged instantly with each knock, as if breath, hot and wet, pressed against the glass. Amy clutched my arm so hard I thought her nails might draw blood. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. Because just beyond the glass, in the dim glow of that lantern, something shifted. A silhouette. Long, thin, taller than any man, its head tilted slightly as though it was listening to us breathe. The knocks stopped. Silence bloomed, louder than sound. And then the lantern flickered once and went out, plunging the left road into absolute black. The windshield cleared as if nothing had been there at all. My lungs burned. I realized I'd been holding my breath. Amy whispered, barely audible, "It wants us to follow." I tried the ignition again. Nothing. Not even a cough from the engine. The dashboard was dead, the lights gone. We were trapped, stranded at the edge of that path, with the fog pressing so close it felt alive. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But run where? Into the fog? Into the forest that had been hunting us since the first wrong turn? Amy started to sob. "We shouldn't have come here," she whispered. I pulled her close, fighting my own terror, and said the only thing I could, "We'll make it out." Even though I didn't believe it. We sat in that paralyzed silence until something new broke it. Music. Faint, drifting through the fog. A melody that didn't belong. Thin, reedy, almost like a flute played in an uneven rhythm. My chest tightened. The sound was coming from the left road, growing louder, closer. I grabbed the flashlight, the heavy metal one we kept near the door, and told Amy to stay inside. She clung to my shirt. "Don't go out there," she begged, "please." But I couldn't sit there waiting for the music to reach us. Every nerve told me that whatever played it was already too close. I stepped into the fog. The cold hit me instantly, soaking into my bones, clinging to my skin like wet cloth. The beam of my flashlight cut only a narrow cone into the gray, the mist swallowing everything else. The music wavered, circling me, sometimes in front, sometimes behind, never fixed. I swung the light wildly, heart pounding, until it landed on something that froze me in place, a chair. Wooden, old, damp, sitting in the middle of the road, and on its seat a lantern, lit, steady, golden. My knees almost buckled, because I knew that chair. I'd seen it in my dreams. The music stopped. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I stumbled backward, dragging my eyes from the lantern, and ran to the RV. Amy pulled me inside, slammed the door, locked it 3 times. I couldn't speak. My throat was raw, my tongue thick. All I could do was shake my head, whispering, "It's real. It's all real." We huddled in the dark RV for hours, listening. Sometimes there were knocks, sometimes footsteps. Once, the sound of something heavy dragging across the roof. But the worst was the laughter, soft, muffled just outside the window. Not joyous laughter, mocking, as if whatever circled us was amused by our terror. Amy covered her ears and sobbed. I sat with my back against the door, packed flashlight in hand, every muscle taut as wire. At some point, exhaustion stole us. I don't remember falling asleep, only waking to the faint gray of morning. The fog had lifted, the air clearer. The RV started on the first turn of the key as if nothing had happened. Relief should have come then. But as I checked the rearview mirror, I froze. Behind us on the left road sat a line of chairs, 10, maybe 12, stretching back into the trees, and every one of them faced the highway, facing us, waiting. We drove hard that day, westward until the coast, Newport, Lincoln City, all the way up toward Astoria. I thought maybe the ocean would protect us, that the endless horizon might scatter whatever held us in its grip. But even by the sea, I felt it. In the crash of the waves, in the calls of gulls, I could hear the rhythm. 3 beats, a pause, 3 more. Amy didn't speak. She hadn't since the night of the music. Her eyes stayed distant, as though part of her had been left behind in the fog. In Astoria, we found another ground, crowded, busy, filled with tourists. I hoped the noise, the chaos, would drown the whispers. We parked close to others, ate among the chatter of families, tried to blend back into normal life. But when darkness fell, so did the illusion. Around midnight, the power cut out across the campground. Every light went black. The laughter of kids, the hum of generators, the clink of bottles, all silenced in an instant. Only the ocean remained, roaring faintly in the distance. Amy clutched my hand so tightly my fingers went numb. I fumbled for the flashlight, turned it on. The beam cut across the campsite, landing on something that made my heart collapse. The chairs. 3 of them this time, arranged neatly just beyond the fire pit. Damp, old, facing us, empty, waiting. I snapped the flashlight off as if darkness could erase them. But the image stayed burned into my mind. Amy buried her face against me, whispering, "They followed. They followed." I held her, my own body shaking, and for the first time I admitted to myself that there was no outrunning this. By dawn, the power returned, the campground alive again as though nothing had happened. The chairs were gone. But Amy didn't smile, didn't relax. Neither did I. Because the truth was clear. The wrong turn hadn't just been a road in Oregon. It had been a crossing. A threshold into something we couldn't step back out of. We decided to leave the state altogether. Washington, Idaho, anywhere but here. We packed in silence, fueled the RV, and hit the highway north. The Columbia River stretched wide beside us, its waters gray and endless. I focused on the lines of the road, repeating in my head like a mantra, "Stay straight, don't turn, don't listen." But Oregon doesn't forgive wrong turns. And as the border neared, the fog began to rise again. The fog rose off the Columbia like it had been waiting for us, curling low and heavy across the bridge as we approached the border. At first, I told myself it was just river mist, natural and harmless. But the way it thickened, swallowing the steel arches and the distant lights of Washington, told me otherwise. The fog wasn't blocking our path, it was pulling us back. Amy sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands folded tight, her lips moving soundlessly. A prayer, maybe, or a mantra to keep herself tethered. I couldn't hear her words, only the tremble in them. The RV headlights carved 2 tunnels through the gray, but beyond that, nothing. The world vanished. I kept my foot pressed hard on the accelerator, desperate to break through. Halfway across the bridge, the knocking started again. Not on the sides, not on the roof. This time, it came from beneath us, 3 thuds, rattling the floor. Pause. 3 more. 3, Amy screamed, curling against the seat. My grip tightened on the wheel, knuckles white, as the RV shuddered with each impact. It felt like something clung to the undercarriage, striking deliberately, reminding us it hadn't let go. Then, just ahead, shapes emerged in the fog. At first, I thought they were cars, stalled on the bridge. But as the beams of our headlights sharpened the outlines, my chest collapsed. Chairs, lined in 2 rows across the lanes, stretching from rail to rail, wooden, waterlogged, gleaming in the damp mist, each one facing us. I slammed the brakes. The RV skidded, tires screeching, before jolting to a stop only feet from the first row. Amy wailed, rocking, hands pressed against her ears. The chairs stood silent, waiting, unmoved by the screech of rubber or the burn of headlights. And then, one by one, lanterns flickered to life on each seat, a ripple of golden fire spreading across the bridge. The fog glowed with their light, turning the air sickly yellow. My stomach lurched. I couldn't breathe, and in that wavering glow, I saw them, figures sitting in the chairs. Tall, thin, their limbs too long, their faces turned down as though asleep. Dozens of them, rocking faintly in unison, the lanterns swaying with their motion. Amy shrieked, grabbing at me. "Turn around, please. Please, we can't go through." But there was no turning around. The fog behind us was thicker, darker, pressing against the rear window like a wall. Forward was the only way. I gritted my teeth, slammed the RV into gear, and floored it. The engine roared, the wheels spun, and we surged forward. The first row of chairs shattered under the bumper, splinters exploding into the fog. But as we plowed through, the figures turned their heads toward us. Not fast, not sudden, just a slow, dreadful tilt, their faces rising into the light. What I saw made my vision blur. Their eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed deeper than the fog itself. Their mouths hung open, wide and gaping, though no sound came. Only silence, an unbearable, crushing silence. Amy screamed until her voice broke. I kept driving, faster, through rows and rows of chairs, the figures turning to follow, their heads snapping back into place as we passed. The RV rattled, the windshield smeared with streaks of something I prayed was only mud. And then, suddenly, we burst free. The fog vanished. The chairs were gone. The bridge stretched clear ahead, Washington lights glowing faintly on the horizon. My chest heaved, my vision swimming. Amy sobbed beside me, broken and hollow. We had crossed, but Oregon wasn't done with us. We pulled into the first rest stop on the Washington side, collapsing in the lot among other travelers. The relief was sharp but shallow, like a wound that still bled beneath the bandage. Amy lay curled on the bed, her body shaking, while I sat at the table, staring at my filthy hands. Every muscle screamed for rest, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying what we'd seen. I must have drifted for an hour before the sound woke me. Not knocking this time, not laughter. A voice, clear, strong, whispering my name. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. The voice came again, closer, from outside the RV. "Come back." My breath hitched. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. At first, only darkness. Then, faintly, the glow of a lantern. Not on the ground. Hovering in the air, swaying slightly, just beyond the glass. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Amy bolted upright, her eyes wild. "What is it?" she cried. I couldn't answer, because the lantern drifted higher, and behind it, in the reflection of the window, I saw them. Rows of chairs stretching out into blackness, filled with figures, waiting. I yanked the curtains shut, locked the doors, turned every light off. Amy clung to me, sobbing into my chest. I held her, but my arms shook so badly I couldn't keep her steady. And the voice kept coming, steady as a heartbeat. "Come back, come back, come back." By dawn, the lantern was gone. The rest stop was normal again, families stretching their legs, engines rumbling, but I knew normal was a lie. The forest had crossed the border with us. The wrong turn had branded us. Wherever we went now, it would follow. We drove north, deeper into Washington, trying to put miles between us and Oregon. But every road sign felt like a warning, every patch of fog like a trap waiting to close. And when we stopped that night in a crowded RV park outside Seattle, I saw them again. Not the figures, not the lanterns, just the chairs. One placed neatly at the edge of our campsite, facing us. Amy wouldn't leave the RV after that. She sat in the back with her knees pulled to her chest, whispering prayers to herself, her eyes never straying to the windows. I wanted to tell her we'd make it, that the further we drove, the safer we'd be. But the lie wouldn't leave my mouth this time, because deep down, I knew. Oregon doesn't forgive wrong turns, it keeps them. And now, so did we. The chair at the edge of our campsite stayed all night. I kept glancing through the curtains, hoping each time it would be gone that I'd been imagining it. But no, it remained patient still, its back slick with dew, its seat empty but expectant. It faced us the way a hunter faces a snare, not needing to move, not needing to chase, just waiting for us to step where it wanted. I didn't tell Amy. She didn't need to know. She had already sunk into herself, eyes hollow, words scarce. If she saw it, she said nothing. And maybe that was worse, that her silence meant she had given up the hope that pretending could keep us safe. By morning, the chair was gone, vanished without trace, the grass beneath it unbent, the soil untouched. I stood outside in the early light, the air sharp with sea salt and diesel fumes from a neighbor's generator, and I realized something chilling. It didn't matter that we had crossed into Washington. The geography was irrelevant. Whatever this was, it wasn't bound by maps. It was bound to us. We drove again, pushing further north as though state lines could mean anything. Amy sat mute, staring at the floor, her lips moving in rhythms I couldn't follow. I tried the radio to cut the silence, but every station collapsed into static. Sometimes beneath the hiss, I thought I could hear faint knocks, 3 and 3, hidden in the white noise. I switched it off. Silence was worse, but lies were heavier. That night, in a crowded lot outside Bellingham, I woke to find the curtains open. I knew I had closed them. My skin went cold. And outside the window, lit by the pale wash of a sodium street lamp, stood a line of chairs, 6 of them, arranged in a half circle facing the RV. Empty. But I knew they weren't empty, because when the wind shifted, I heard it. Breathing. Slow, synchronized, as though 6 unseen chests rose and fell together. Amy whimpered in her sleep, curling tighter. I closed the curtains with shaking hands, pulled her against me, and whispered lies about safety until dawn broke. We reached the Canadian border the next day. I thought, foolishly, that crossing out of the country might free us, that whatever had taken root in Oregon's woods wouldn't follow past the limits of a nation. But as we approached, fog began to gather again, thick and low, rolling across the pavement in unnatural swells. My throat tightened. Amy shook her head violently, clutching my arm. "No more borders," she said, her voice raw. "No more crossings, it follows. Always." I turned us around. We didn't speak for hours, the highway stretching endlessly beneath us. My body felt hollowed, like my bones themselves had grown tired of carrying the weight of dread. Every tree we passed felt like a marker. Every bend in the road felt like the fork that had ruined us. In Olympia, we found another campground, one packed with life, families grilling, children chasing each other through the dusk. Normalcy. For a brief moment, I believed it might hold the horror at bay. We parked, ate silently, and lay down early, surrounded by the muffled joy of strangers. But sometime after midnight, the campground fell silent. Not gradually, suddenly. The laughter cut mid-echo, the dogs ceased barking, even the crickets stopped. The silence was total, suffocating. Amy sat up, her eyes wide, and then came the sound we feared most. 3 knocks, slow and steady, against the door of the RV. I froze, staring at the handle. Amy grabbed my arm, her nails biting into my skin. "Don't," she mouthed. "Don't open it." I nodded, barely breathing. But the knocks came again. 3. A pause. 3 more. Patient. Waiting. Then a voice, low, steady, seeping through the thin walls. My name, drawn out, stretched into something almost inhuman. It wasn't Amy's voice, and it wasn't mine, but it knew me. It had known me since the fork in that forgotten road. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voice slid past them, curling straight into my mind. Come back. Left road, over and over, relentless. Amy screamed, curling into herself, her hands clawing at her temples as though she could rip the words out. And then, as suddenly as it had started, silence returned. The air grew heavy, the walls pressed inward. We sat frozen until dawn broke, pale light spilling across the curtains. When I opened the door, there was nothing. No figures, no chairs, just the quiet aftermath of survival. But that morning, Amy changed. She didn't speak, didn't move. She sat on the bed, her eyes fixed on nothing, her lips slightly parted as though listening to something I couldn't hear. I shook her, begged her, pleaded with her to answer. Nothing. Just silence. And then, faintly, she began to rock. Back and forth, the same rhythm as the chairs. Panic clawed through me. I drove without direction, desperate, trying to outrun what had rooted itself in her. The highways blurred, towns passed unmarked. Time itself seemed to unravel. Amy rocked beside me, silent, her eyes glassy, her body distant. That night, in an empty rest area, I made the mistake of looking in the mirror. Not the rear view, the small bathroom mirror inside the RV. My reflection stared back, pale, gaunt, but wrong, because behind my reflection, faint but undeniable, rows of chairs stretched into the darkness, and in the first chair Amy sat. Not the Amy beside me in the RV, the Amy behind the glass. Her lips moved, whispering words I couldn't hear. The mirror cracked with a sound like a gunshot. I stumbled back, clutching my chest, my breath shallow. Amy never stirred. She only rocked. Back and forth, and for the first time I realized the truth. The forest hadn't followed us out of Oregon. We had brought it with us, and piece by piece it was replacing us. Amy's rocking didn't stop. Not through breakfast, not through hours of driving, not through the long stretch of afternoon where the sky glowed dull and the highway unrolled endlessly ahead. She sat with her hands limp in her lap, her lips slightly parted, her body swaying as though pulled by invisible strings. I spoke to her, begged her, shouted her name until my throat burned. Nothing. Her eyes never flickered toward me, never blinked. They were fixed on something I couldn't see. By the third day of her silence, I realized I was alone, even though she was still beside me, and it hollowed me out in a way no forest, no fog, no whisper ever had. The woman I loved was gone, stolen by a road we should never have taken. But the forest wasn't done with me. It began with the GPS again. I had left it broken, shattered from when Amy hurled it against the dashboard. But one night, as I sat in the driver's seat staring at the dead screen, it lit up. The glass was still cracked, the pixels fractured, but across the spiderweb of damage a familiar phrase glowed. Left road ahead. I slammed my fist into it until the plastic caved. Still, the words burned, etched behind my eyes as if the screen had only been a mirror. That night, I dreamed. Not shallow terror dreams like before. This was deeper, clearer, more real than waking life. I stood at the fork again, the one where it all began. Only this time, both roads were lit by lanterns, stretching into infinite black. Figures sat in chairs along the edges, tall and silent, their faces downturned. And at the center of the fork, Amy stood. But not my Amy, the one who rocked in silence. This Amy smiled faintly, her head tilted, her eyes glistening with tears. "Come back," she whispered. "It's the only way out." I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, my hands trembling. Amy was still beside me, rocking, silent. But for the first time, her lips moved with sound. A whisper, faint and cracked. Left road. Left road. I broke. I drove aimlessly for days after that, chasing highways, abandoning maps. I tried to outrun the voices, the knocks, the chairs that appeared in campgrounds and rest stops and parking lots. But no matter where I went, the signs returned. Painted onto walls, carved into bathroom stalls, scrawled onto trees that shouldn't have been there. Left road. Always waiting. Sleep starved me, dreams consumed me, and each night Amy whispered louder, her voice blending with the ones outside. By the fifth day, I knew I couldn't resist anymore. Somewhere south of Tacoma, I found it. Not a fork marked on maps, not a turn anyone else would see. Just a break in the forest, a dirt road curving left, almost invisible from the asphalt. But the moment I passed it, my skin prickled. And Amy's whisper rose in volume, her rocking more frantic. Left road, left road, left road. I pulled over, hands trembling, heart hammering. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the mouth of that dirt path. The trees leaned inward, their branches knitting into a tunnel of shadow. The air around it shimmered faintly, as though it wasn't part of this world at all. I turned to Amy. She had stopped rocking, her eyes, glassy for days, now fixed on me with startling clarity. "Please," she whispered. the first true word she'd spoken since the night of the knocks. Take it. I don't know what terrified me more, the thought of driving into that road or the thought of what would happen if I didn't. I started the engine. The RV rumbled forward. Gravel crunched under the tires as we crossed the threshold into shadow. The forest swallowed us instantly. The light vanished, the world collapsing into damp silence. The road stretched narrow, endless, flanked by rows of chairs. Hundreds of them. Each one occupied now, figures tall and skeletal, their hollow eyes fixed on us. Lanterns glowed on every seat, their light painting the mist gold. Amy sat straighter, her lips curling into something between a smile and a sob. She reached for my hand. I gripped it tight, my breath shallow, every nerve screaming to turn back. But there was no turning. The road only went forward. The deeper we drove, the louder the knocks became. Not from outside this time, from inside, from the cabinets, from the walls, from the floor beneath us. 3 thuds. A pause. 3 more. The RV rattled, the windows vibrating with the rhythm. Amy didn't flinch. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Almost there." The road curved sharply, spiraling inward. My chest tightened. I realized what the hand-drawn map had meant. The spiral. The black X at its center. We weren't driving toward an exit. We were driving toward the heart of it. At the end of the spiral, the road widened into a clearing. A perfect circle, ringed with chairs. Hundreds, maybe thousands, stretching into the mist. At the center, a single stump, and on it, the lantern. The same lantern we'd seen in dreams, in clearings, in reflections. Its flame flickered steady, waiting. Amy let go of my hand. She stood, her movements slow, deliberate, as if guided by invisible strings. "I have to go," she whispered. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but her voice was calm, resolute. "It's the only way back." I screamed her name, begged her not to step outside, but she did. She opened the door, climbed down into the clearing, and walked straight toward the stump. The figures in the chairs turned their heads in unison, following her, their hollow eyes glinting in the lantern light. Amy reached the stump, placed her hand on the lantern, and turned back to me. For a moment, I saw her, the real her. Her smile, her warmth, the woman who had hummed with the windows down that first evening. "I love you," she whispered. And then the lantern flared. The light exploded outward, blinding, swallowing the clearing, the chairs, the figures, the fog. I shielded my eyes, screaming her name until my throat tore. And when the light faded, Amy was gone. The clearing was gone. The spiral road was gone. I sat in the RV, alone, parked on a narrow highway shoulder beneath the open Oregon sky. No chairs, no lanterns, no fog, just silence. But the passenger seat beside me was empty, and I knew the road hadn't given her back. The silence after the light faded was worse than any knocking, any whisper, any laughter in the dark. It was absolute, an emptiness that seemed to stretch wider than the sky. I sat, gripping the wheel, my chest heaving, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes already knew. Amy was gone. The passenger seat was empty. The door was shut. The world was ordinary again, cruel in its normalcy. I stumbled outside, falling to my knees on the shoulder of the highway. Asphalt, pine trees, the distant hiss of a stream cutting through the valley. Not a clearing, not a spiral road, just Oregon, plain and indifferent. I screamed her name into the air until my voice broke, until my throat was raw, until the trees gave nothing back but silence. When I crawled back into the RV, her things were still there. Her sweater folded on the bed, her shoes by the door, the book she'd been reading wedged into the pocket of the seat. It was as if she had only stepped outside for a moment, as if she'd come back any second. But she wouldn't. The forest had claimed her. And in some way I couldn't comprehend, she had gone willingly. I drove aimlessly after that, though I barely remember the miles. Days blurred into one another. Gas stations, rest stops, campgrounds, I haunted them like a ghost, my body moving but my mind trapped in the clearing. Every reflection in every window showed me rows of chairs. Every shadow between the trees glowed faintly, like the flicker of a lantern. Sleep was worse. Every dream dragged me back to the spiral, to Amy standing at the stump, her hand on the lantern. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes She didn't look at me at all. I'd wake gasping, sweat drenching the sheets, only to find the RV exactly as I'd left it. Her sweater, her shoes, her book, waiting like questions I couldn't answer. Weeks passed before I realized I wasn't escaping anything. I had become the wrong turn. The forest didn't need to follow me anymore. It lived inside me now. I'd catch myself humming in the same rhythm as the knocking. 3 notes, a pause, 3 more. My fingers would tap the table in the same cadence, and sometimes late at night, I'd feel myself start to rock, back and forth, just like Amy. The first time I saw a chair inside the RV, I thought I'd lost my mind completely. I woke in the middle of the night, the air cold, my breath fogging in the beam of the flashlight I kept beside the bed, and there it was, at the foot of the bed, wooden, damp, its legs sinking slightly into the carpet. I froze, unable to scream, unable to breathe. My eyes locked on it until dawn came, until the first light of morning dissolved it into nothing. But the damp imprint of its legs remained in the carpet fibers. That was when I understood there is no leaving the left road once you've taken it. It doesn't matter how far you drive, how many borders you cross, how much light you surround yourself with. It's not a place, it's a decision, a door you open that never closes again. And once it marks you, it waits. Patient, endless. I thought about turning back, about driving to the fork, finding the dirt path, giving myself over to the spiral. Maybe I'd see Amy again. Maybe I'd find answers, but another part of me knew better. The left road doesn't give, it only takes. And what it took from me, it wouldn't return. Not whole. Instead, I became something else. A warning. A hollow man in an RV, rattling down highways and back roads, parking in campgrounds where laughter and firelight remind me of what I lost. Sometimes people ask where my wife is. I tell them she stayed behind. I never explain what that means. But sometimes, late at night, when I sit by a dying fire, strangers will hear it. The knocking. 3 times, a pause, 3 more. They'll look at me, eyes wide, and I'll see their fear bloom. And I'll want to warn them, to tell them never to trust the signs, never to follow the arrows carved into bark, never to take the left road. But the truth sticks in my throat, because warnings don't matter. The wrong turn isn't a mistake you can avoid. It's a choice waiting to be made, over and over, by people who believe roads are just roads, until one day they find themselves on a path that doesn't appear on maps, and by then, it's too late. Sometimes I hear Amy's voice in the dark, calling my name the way she used to when we'd lose each other in crowded campgrounds. I'll stumble out of the RV, scanning the tree line, desperate to believe she's there. But the only thing I ever find are chairs. 1, 3, sometimes a dozen, empty, facing me, waiting. And I understand finally why Oregon doesn't forgive wrong turns. Because once you take one, you don't just get lost on the road. You get lost in yourself. You start leaving pieces behind in the silence, in the fog, and the chairs that circle closer each night. And eventually, there won't be enough of me left to drive away. I used to believe the forest wanted me to return. Now I know the truth. The forest doesn't want me back. It just wants me emptied. Hollow. Like the figures who sit in the chairs, rocking in unison, lanterns swaying in the dark. And the day I finally sit among them, no one will ever know where I went. Just another RVer swallowed by Oregon. Just another wrong turn. The days bleed together now. Highways, forests, towns, they're all the same. I don't look at maps anymore. I don't check signs. I just drive, waiting for the road to decide when it wants me again. Because deep down, I know the left road is still out there, waiting. I see it sometimes, even when I know it can't be real. A dirt path breaking from the asphalt, curving into the trees, always to the left. No matter where I am, Washington, Idaho, even Nevada, it appears. And when I glance in the mirrors, the reflection of the RV always shows it clearer than my eyes do. A glowing line, beckoning. Amy's voice lives in the air now. Not constant, but sudden, sharp always when I'm close to sleep. Come back. Sometimes soft, sometimes stern. Sometimes it sounds like she's begging. Other times, like she's commanding. And every time my body trembles with the urge to obey. But I don't. Not yet. The knocking has grown bolder. It used to stay outside. On the roof, the doors, the glass. Now it's inside. 3 taps against the cupboard while I cook. 3 on the table when I sit to eat. Sometimes in the dead of night, 3 soft knocks against the headboard while I pretend to sleep. I've stopped opening the cupboards. I've stopped eating at the table. I barely sleep. The rhythm follows me everywhere, marking time, counting down to something I can't name. And the chairs, they're multiplying. At first they appeared only in campgrounds, rest stops, places tied to the road. Now I see them everywhere, in reflections, in shadows, even in the patterns of trees along the highway. Rows and rows, always facing me, always waiting. I know what they want. They want me to sit, to take my place among them, to stop resisting, to become what Amy became. And I think more and more about giving in, because maybe sitting down is the only way to see her again. Maybe the only way to end the endless knocking is to join the rhythm. But some nights, when I'm strongest, I remember the way she looked at me that last time. The smile through her tears, the words she whispered before the lantern took her, "I love you." And I wonder if that was a goodbye or a plea for me not to follow. I've thought about warning others, about pulling into campgrounds and telling families, telling couples, telling the loners like me, don't trust the signs, don't take the wrong turn, don't listen when the forest calls. But every time I try, the word's not in my throat, because the truth is worse than a warning. The truth is that the left road isn't a place. It's a hunger. It's always there, just waiting for you to be tired enough, lost enough, desperate enough to see it. And when you do, it doesn't matter how many times someone told you not to. You'll take it anyway. You'll convince yourself you're different, that the rules don't apply to you, that one wrong turn won't matter. And then you'll hear the knocking. I don't know how long I can keep driving. My hands shake on the wheel, my body aches with exhaustion, my mind blurs at the edges. Sometimes I forget what state I'm in, what town I've passed, what day it is. Sometimes I wake in the driver's seat with no memory of the miles behind me. And once I woke parked at the mouth of a dirt road, the tires pointed left, the trees closing like jaws. I drove away that time. But I don't know if I'll always have the strength, because the road is patient. It doesn't chase. It waits. It knows that every driver makes a wrong turn eventually. And when I finally can't resist anymore, when the lantern's glow seems warmer than the sun, when the knocking matches the beat of my own heart, I'll take it. I'll drive the spiral to its center. I'll sit in the chair that's been waiting for me all along. And when someone else comes down that road, lost, tired, ignoring their instincts, maybe they'll see me there. Rocking slowly, lantern swaying at my feet. Another figure with hollow eyes waiting for the next lost traveler to join the circle. Until then, I drive. Warning myself more than anyone else, Oregon doesn't forgive wrong turns. It never has. It never will. I've always believed that fear doesn't come from the dark itself. It comes from what the dark makes us imagine. What it forces us to believe is standing just beyond the edge of the firelight, just beyond the reach of our own shadows. That belief got tested in a way I never could have prepared for, on a night that still leaves me uneasy to talk about. It started simple. My wife, Erin, and I had planned a late summer trip through the Pacific Northwest, just the two of us and our small Class C RV. We'd been doing these trips for years, at chasing freedom in the way only the road can give it. Through winding forest highways, endless skies, and nights where the silence was its own kind of company. We were both in our early 30s, young enough to still feel restless, but old enough to crave time away from the noise of regular life. That week, we had been making our way through Washington, avoiding crowded RV parks and sticking mostly to state campgrounds and Forest Service land. Erin had always said she slept better in the woods, where the only sounds were wind through the trees or an owl echoing in the distance. I felt the same, until we stumbled onto a place that didn't quite match the rhythm of the others. We hadn't planned to stop there. The campground wasn't even marked on our map. We'd been driving longer than usual that day, and when we saw the wooden sign half hidden in brush along a dirt road, Meadowview Campground. We both agreed it was time to call it a night. It was small, with only a handful of overgrown sites tucked under towering firs. No host, no other campers, just the remnants of picnic tables that looked like they'd been abandoned years ago. "This feels forgotten," Aaron said as I pulled the RV into a clearing that overlooked a stretch of meadow now swallowed by weeds. "That's kind of the charm," I replied, trying to sound light. But I couldn't shake the thought that she was right. The place looked deserted in a way that wasn't just about neglect. It had a feeling, heavy and expectant, as if something had simply paused here long ago and never really moved on. Still, it was late. The idea of pushing another hour down dark roads didn't appeal, so we set up camp. Aaron started dinner inside while I walked the perimeter of our site, stretching my legs. I noticed something strange almost immediately. The ground was unusually soft, like the soil had been turned over recently. Not everywhere, just patches near the edge of the meadow. I told myself it was animals, maybe deer rooting around, but the thought stayed with me. After dinner, we sat outside by a small fire, the night wrapping around us. The woods were quiet, too quiet. Even in the stillest forests, you usually hear something. Crickets, the rustle of small creatures, the occasional snap of a branch in the underbrush. Here, it was as if sound itself had been drained from the place. Aaron noticed it too. "Where are the insects?" she asked softly, poking the fire with a stick. I didn't have an answer. My eyes kept drifting to the meadow, its pale outline barely visible under the moonlight. Something about its openness felt wrong, like a stage waiting for an unseen actor. And then it happened, something so subtle, so easy to dismiss that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. My shadow, stretched out long by the firelight, shifted, not the natural flicker of flames, not the bend of trees and wind. No, my shadow bent unnaturally, as though for a split second it lagged behind my movement. I lifted my hand, slowly, deliberately. My shadow followed, but a fraction too late. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Aaron didn't notice. She was still focused on the fire. I tried it again, raising both arms this time. My shadow mimicked me, but with a hesitation, as though something on the other side was trying to keep up and failing. I wanted to dismiss it as my eyes playing tricks, the fire creating some optical illusion. But as I stared, my chest tightening, I realized the flames weren't strong enough to cast such a sharp outline. And still the shadow was there, clinging to me like a second skin with a mind of its own. "Cold tonight," Aaron said suddenly, rubbing her arms. Her voice snapped me out of my trance. I forced myself to sit back down, telling myself it was nothing, that exhaustion was making me see things. But deep down, I knew better. Something wasn't right. We doused the fire around midnight and climbed into the RV. Aaron fell asleep quickly, her breathing steady in the dark. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying what I'd seen. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that shadow, lagging just a second too long, as though it were watching me, studying me. At some point, I drifted off, but the night did not give me rest. I woke to a faint sound outside, a steady, deliberate tapping, not on the RV, not close, but somewhere out in the meadow. 3 taps, then silence. Another 3 taps, then silence. It went on like that, rhythmic and patient, as though someone were striking wood with a hollow stick. I eased out of bed and pressed my face to the window. The meadow was silver under the moonlight, but empty. Nothing moved. The tapping stopped the moment I looked. I told myself not to wake Aaron. She would think I was overreacting, that I was letting the strangeness of the place get to me. But as I stood there, heart hammering, I caught sight of something in the grass. A darker shape among the shadows, low to the ground, still. Watching. I blinked, and it was gone. Or maybe it had never been there. I don't know. All I know is that when I finally crawled back into bed, I didn't sleep. Not really. Every creak of the RV, every shift of the wind, kept me wide awake until dawn bled into the sky. The next morning, Aaron was cheerful, oblivious to my exhaustion. We had coffee outside, the fire pit still cold from the night before. I didn't mention what I'd seen. But when she stood up and stretched, I saw it again. her shadow cast against the meadow grass, took just a second too long to follow. I felt ice slide through my veins. This time, it wasn't just me. Erin didn't notice. She was smiling, squinting into the morning light, pouring the last of her coffee into the grass before walking back toward the RV. I stood frozen by the picnic table, my eyes fixed on the shadow that had hesitated. Just a breath, but long enough for me to be certain. I wanted to say something, to call her back, to point it out, but the words locked in my throat. What was I supposed to say? Your shadow moved wrong. Don't you see it? Instead, I packed up our gear with a stiffness I couldn't shake. Erin hummed quietly as she rolled up the awning, oblivious to the weight pressing on me. I told myself I was being irrational, that lack of sleep was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew I'd seen something real, and it wasn't just in my head. By the time we were back on the road, I felt a strange relief. Leaving that place behind made my chest loosen, as if some invisible hand had stopped pressing down on me. Erin chatted as we drove, about where to stop next, about wanting to hike later that week, but I barely listened. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us down the road. We stopped for gas a couple of hours later in a small town, the kind where the grocery store, hardware shop, and post office are all part of the same brick building. While Erin went inside to grab a few things, I stayed by the RV, stretching my legs. That's when I noticed it again. The sun was high, shadows short and sharp. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, and there it was. Just a half second of lag, so quick it would have been easy to miss. My body moved, and my shadow caught up as though pulled by invisible strings. My stomach twisted. This wasn't firelight illusion. This wasn't sleep deprivation. It was happening in full daylight, in a town with people walking by, none of them noticing a thing. When Erin came back out, I forced myself to smile and act normal. But the rest of the day I felt off-kilter, like the world had slipped just slightly sideways. Every time I glanced down at the ground, I saw it. That fraction of delay that made me feel less like I was casting a shadow and more like I was being mirrored. That night we pulled into another campground, one we'd actually stayed at before. Clean sights, a running water spigot, the distant sound of a river. Familiarity should have brought comfort, but it didn't. As we set up, I found myself scanning the tree line, waiting for the silence to descend the way it had at Meadowview. But here, at least, there were sounds. Birds, squirrels, even the buzzing of insects. It should have been reassuring. It wasn't. I couldn't stop watching Erin. As she moved, I checked her shadow constantly. I saw the lag again when she bent down to grab firewood. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but it was there. And it was worse knowing it wasn't just me anymore. I didn't tell her. I couldn't. What would I say? Instead, I busied myself with the fire, keeping my back to her, trying to focus on the crackle of flames instead of the way our shadows stretched unnaturally across the ground. That night, I lay awake again, the hum of insects outside doing little to calm me. I wanted to believe the worst was behind us, that Meadowview had just left its mark on my nerves. But when I finally drifted into a light sleep, I dreamed. I was standing in the meadow again, under the same pale moonlight. My shadow stretched out in front of me, long and distorted. But then it began to rise, peeling itself from the ground like smoke unraveling. I tried to move, but my body stayed still, rigid. My shadow stood on its own, shape still mine, but eyes dark and hollow. It reached toward me, and when its hand touched my chest, I woke with a violent gasp. The RV was pitch black. Erin stirred beside me, but didn't wake. My chest was damp with sweat, my heart rattling. And then I saw it, on the far wall of the RV, faint against the dim light leaking through the curtains. A shadow, my shadow. Except I wasn't moving. I was flat on my back, motionless. But the shadow shifted, slowly, as if turning its head to look at me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even shout. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would vanish. When I opened them again, the wall was empty. By morning, I felt hollow, every muscle aching from the tension I carried through the night. Erin noticed my silence as we made coffee, but I brushed her off. She was already starting to complain of a headache, her skin pale in a way that worried me. She said it was probably just dehydration, but a thought clawed at the back of my mind. What if it wasn't? We spent that day hiking a short trail by the river. I tried to clear my head, but I couldn't ignore the way Erin's movement seemed slightly off, as though her body was out of sync with the world around her. When she bent to tie her boot, her shadow took a beat too long to settle into the same position. That night, I finally broke. We were sitting by the fire, the woods quiet except for the rushing of the river, when I asked her, "Do you ever feel like your shadow isn't keeping up?" Erin laughed, a short, sharp sound, and shook her head. "What are you talking about?" "I've seen it," I said, my voice shaking. "It's not just me, I've seen yours too. It lags, like it's not really ours anymore." Her smile faltered. She studied me for a long time, her face unreadable. And then slowly she whispered, "I thought it was just me." The fire popped, sending sparks upward. My heart lurched. "You've seen it?" I asked. She nodded, her hands tightening in her lap. "Since Meadowview." I didn't want to say anything. I thought I was losing it. Relief and terror washed over me at the same time. I wasn't crazy, but that meant it was real. Whatever this was, it was happening to both of us. That night, neither of us slept much. We kept the fire burning until it was nothing but glowing embers, afraid of the darkness that waited beyond it. When we finally retreated into the RV, we lay there in silence, listening, waiting. Around 3 a.m., the tapping returned. 3 hollow knocks, a pause, another 3, the same rhythm as before. Erin's hand gripped mine tightly in the dark. Neither of us moved. The sound drew closer, inch by inch, until it seemed to circle the RV. Tap! 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 I forced myself to look through the sliver of curtain, my eyes straining in the dark. At first, I saw nothing, but then, in the faint light of the moon, I noticed the shadows. Not ours, not the trees. Dozens of them, moving along the ground in a slow, crawling rhythm, sliding toward the RV. The sight locked me in place. Shadows shouldn't move without something to cast them, but these did. They slid across the grass, silent, detached, like stains spreading over the earth. The fire had long gone out, and the moon wasn't strong enough to explain them. Yet still they stretched and crawled, pulling themselves along in jerking motions that felt too deliberate to be mistaken for tricks of light. I gripped Erin's hand harder. My nails dug into her skin. She whispered, barely audible, "Do you see them too?" I couldn't bring myself to answer. I just nodded, and we stayed there, frozen in our small bed, listening as the tapping circled us, accompanied now by that impossible tide of dark shapes. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence returned, thick and heavy, pressing down on us until I swore I could hear the pounding of my own blood. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, waiting for the shapes to reappear, but they were gone, erased, as though they had never been there at all. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. At first light, I started the RV without a word, and Erin didn't ask questions. We just wanted distance, miles of it. We drove through winding forest roads, past small towns, past rivers that cut through steep gorges, never once speaking of what we had seen. It was too big, too impossible. To talk about it would make it real. But as the day wore on, silence became unbearable. Erin finally broke it. "What if it's following us?" she asked quietly. I glanced at her, then back at the road. "It is." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. I hadn't meant to sound so certain, but I was. Every shadow we passed seemed to linger too long. Even the trees looked wrong, their outlines stretching across the ground with unnatural hesitation, as though they too were infected by whatever had touched us at Meadowview. By the time we reached our next destination, a lakeside campground we had planned to stay at long before any of this, we were both frayed at the edges. But neither of us wanted to keep driving. We were exhausted, jittery, worn thin by fear we couldn't explain. The place was beautiful. Pine trees circling a glassy lake, the air cool and crisp, the smell of wood smoke drifting from other campers' fires. Normalcy. For a moment, we tried to let ourselves believe it. We set up camp, cooked dinner outside, even laughed a little. For a few precious hours, I thought maybe we had outrun it. But as the sun dipped and the lake turned black, the comfort unraveled. Erin sat close to the fire, her eyes wide and alert. "Don't look at the ground," she whispered. Her words cut straight through me. Of course I looked, and there it was, my shadow, flickering with the firelight, but not in time. It lagged, longer this time, more pronounced. When I leaned forward, it hesitated, then followed in a jerky, uneven motion, like something trying to mimic me, but forgetting how human bodies actually moved. I stood up too quickly, stumbling back from the fire. Erin gasped. Her shadow did the same thing, broken, delayed, wrong. I grabbed her wrist. "We can't stay here," I said. "Not tonight." But before we could even begin to put the fire out, something shifted in the air. The temperature dropped sharply, the way it does before a storm, though the sky above was clear. The flames bent sideways as though pushed by an unseen hand, and then the tapping started again. Not far this time, not circling, right behind us. I spun and my stomach dropped. At the edge of the firelight stood a figure. Not flesh and blood, no, a shadow, three-dimensional upright, its form vaguely human but hollow inside. Its edges shimmered like smoke blurring into the night. It didn't move at first. It only stood there as if waiting, watching. Erin whimpered, her grip crushing mine, and then slowly it lifted its arm. My heart seized. It was copying me, the exact way I had raised my hand that first night at Meadowview. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The figure stepped forward. The firelight didn't touch it. It moved independently, as though it didn't belong to this world at all. I yanked Erin toward the RV, nearly dragging her. We stumbled inside, slamming the door shut, pulling every curtain closed. The tapping followed, methodical against the side of the vehicle. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. It moved from window to window, circling, hunting. Erin was crying silently beside me. I held her tight, my own chest trembling with terror I couldn't hide. The RV seemed to shrink around us, every sound magnified. And then for the first time, the tapping stopped and was replaced by something far worse. A whisper. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clear. Just the faintest suggestion of words sliding through the walls like smoke. I couldn't understand them, but the cadence chilled me. Slow, deliberate, insistent. Erin pressed her hands over her ears, shaking her head. "It's in my head," she muttered. "It's in my head." But it wasn't. I heard it too. We sat like that for hours, paralyzed, until finally, mercifully, the first light of dawn crept through the curtains. The moment it did, the whispering stopped. The RV was silent again, except for our ragged breathing. We left before the sun had fully risen. Erin wouldn't even look out the windows. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, forcing myself not to glance at the rearview mirror, afraid of what I might see. The day passed in a blur. We drove without direction, just trying to put distance between us and that lake. But no matter how far we went, the feeling clung to us, heavy and suffocating. That night, we parked in a rest area off the highway, too drained to keep going. The lot was empty, lit by a few dim lamps. I thought maybe being in a place so mundane would help, that maybe the presence would lose its grip here. But when I stepped outside to stretch, I noticed something that turned my stomach. There was no light behind me, no cars, no trees, nothing to interfere. Yet when I looked down, my shadow stretched out on the pavement just as it should, except it wasn't connected to me anymore. There was a gap, a thin strip of empty ground between my feet and the start of the shadow, and when I stepped back, it didn't move. It stayed where it was. I staggered backward, the breath leaving my chest in a sharp gasp. My shadow didn't follow. It lay stretched out on the pavement like a cutout, perfectly still, as though I had stepped away from it. "Erin," I whispered, my voice cracking. She came out of the RV, rubbing her eyes, confusion flickering across her face. I pointed down at the ground, too rattled to form words. When she saw it, her expression changed instantly. Fear, sharp and unmistakable. Her own shadow trembled beneath her feet like ripples moving across water. She lifted her arm, testing it, and for a brief second it followed. Then it stuttered, broke apart, and reassembled with a shudder, half a beat behind her. We stared at the asphalt as though it had betrayed us. This wasn't imagination anymore. This was something neither of us could deny. "We can't stay here," Erin said, her voice shaking. I nodded, but I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy, my thoughts scattered. All I could do was stare at that strip of emptiness between me and the shape that was supposed to be mine. It felt like looking at a corpse, familiar, yet lifeless. Finally, Erin tugged me back toward the RV. We climbed in, locked the doors, and sat in silence. I could still see it in my head, the way my shadow had lain there unmoving as though it belonged to something else now. That night, neither of us slept. Erin kept the overhead light on, her knees pulled to her chest, while I sat at the table staring out the windshield into the dark. The silence pressed in, broken only by the occasional truck passing on the highway. Each time, its headlights stretched our shadows faintly across the walls inside the RV. And each time, they didn't quite line up. By morning, we were unraveling. Every glance at the ground, every flicker of movement in our periphery reminded us that something was wrong. Erin barely spoke, her face pale, her hands trembling. I tried to keep us moving, but it felt like no matter where we went, the air around us carried that same weight. We stopped at a diner in a small town around noon, desperate for normalcy. The clatter of plates, the hum of conversation, the smell of bacon and coffee, it should have been grounding. But when the waitress poured our drinks, I caught sight of our reflections in the chrome napkin dispenser. They lagged. Not by much, just a flicker, half a second of delay, but it was enough. Erin saw it too. Her fork clattered against the plate, and the waitress glanced at us oddly before walking away. I leaned across the table, whispering fiercely, "It's not just shadows, it's reflections too." Erin shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. What if it's not outside us at all? What if it's inside? Her words lodged in me like a splinter. I wanted to argue, to deny it, but I couldn't. The thought had already rooted in me, that something was pulling us apart from ourselves, piece by piece. We left half our food uneaten, paid in silence, and drove until the sun sank low again. By the time we reached another remote campground, we were running on fumes. I parked the RV at the far end, away from the few other campers. Erin sat curled in the passenger seat, staring out at the fading light. "I don't want to go out there," she whispered. "Then we won't," I said, forcing calm I didn't feel. I closed the curtains, locked every door, and turned on every light inside. But no amount of light could hide what happened next. As the night deepened, the shadows inside the RV grew longer, stretching unnaturally across the floor and up the walls. They didn't move with us anymore. They shifted when they wanted to, sliding slowly like oil across glass. At one point, Erin stood to get water. Her shadow lingered behind on the seat, sitting there even after she had walked away. She dropped the glass, shattering it on the floor. We both stared as the shadow finally peeled itself from the cushion, dripping down like liquid before slithering to rejoin her feet. That was the moment we both broke. Erin sobbed into her hands, and I held her, but my own body shook with fear I couldn't contain. Sometime after midnight, exhaustion pulled me into a restless doze. I dreamed again, but it didn't feel like a dream. I was standing in the meadow from the first night, the air cold and sharp. My shadow was there, a few feet away from me, no longer attached. It stood on its own, upright and still. Slowly it turned its head, and for the first time, I saw its face. It was mine, but distorted, eyes hollow, mouth slack, features blurred like melting wax. It smiled at me with a jaggedness that wasn't human, and then it whispered, though its lips barely moved, "Not yet, but soon." I woke with a strangled gasp, the RV pitch black except for the faint glow of a nightlight. Erin was awake, sitting upright in bed, her eyes wide. "You heard it too," she said flatly. I didn't ask what she meant, I just nodded. The next day we didn't drive. We couldn't. We sat in the RV, blinds shut, afraid of the world outside. Erin barely moved, her skin pale, her voice hollow. When I tried to reach for her to comfort her, she flinched, not from me, but from the way my shadow stretched toward her across the seat before I had even lifted my hand. By dusk, she whispered, "I can't tell where I end anymore. I don't know if I'm me." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was still herself. But the truth was I felt it too. The line between body and shadow, self and reflection, had blurred until I wasn't sure either of us were whole anymore. That night, the tapping returned. Louder. Closer. This time it shook the RV, rattling the thin walls, making the cupboards tremble. We held each other, teeth clenched, as the sound moved from door to door, window to window, like a hand testing every possible entrance. And then, in the dead silence that followed, I saw it. Our shadows on the wall opposite the bed. But they weren't attached to us anymore. They were standing, watching, waiting. I couldn't move. Neither of us could. We sat there, backs pressed against the thin mattress, watching as the figures on the wall stood perfectly still, shaped like us, but no longer bound to us. They were taller somehow, stretched beyond natural proportions, their edges bending like smoke caught in an invisible draft. "Don't move," Erin whispered, as though sound itself might draw them closer. But they didn't need sound. They were already aware of us. I could feel it, the same way you know when someone is staring at you in a crowded room. Except this was worse. This was intimate. This was possession. I tried to test it. Slowly, I lifted my hand. My shadow didn't move. Neither did Erin's. They remained where they were, staring back at us with a stillness that made my stomach clench. Then, without warning, they tilted their heads in perfect unison, as if mimicking some invisible signal only they could hear. Erin sucked in a sharp breath and clutched my arm. "What do they want?" she whispered. The question clawed at me, but before I could respond, the shadows began to move. Not toward us, not yet, but across the walls, sliding like stains. They circled the inside of the RV, their forms bending across corners, spilling over cupboards and ceiling. Their movements had no sound, but the air shifted with each ripple of darkness, colder, denser. I reached for the flashlight by the bed, snapping it on, the beam cutting across the RV. For a heartbeat, the shadows vanished. Relief flooded me, too quickly, because then, slowly, they slid back into view, not erased, but stronger, sharper, as though the light had only made them hungrier. "They're not leaving," Erin said, her voice breaking. I knew she was right. The walls of the RV felt like paper, flimsy and useless against them. I grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the driver's seat. "We're leaving," I said, though my voice shook. The moment the engine roared to life, the tapping began again. Not outside this time, inside. Knock, 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 on the bathroom door. I slammed the RV into gear, tires spitting gravel as we lurched onto the narrow road out of the campground. Erin clutched the dashboard, her eyes wide and fixed on the dark ahead. Behind us, the knocking grew louder, spreading to the cabinets, the fridge, the walls. It sounded like dozens of hands beating in rhythm, trying to claw their way out of the thin skin of the RV. "Don't stop," Erin shouted. I didn't. I drove blind, headlights cutting a narrow path through the trees, every curve of the road threatening to send us crashing. Still the pounding continued, rattling through every panel. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence hit harder than the noise. I kept driving, chest heaving, until the forest thinned and we reached a deserted highway. Only then did I slow enough to breathe. Erin buried her face in her hands. "It's not going to let us go, is it?" Because I knew. Whatever this was, it had attached itself to us the moment we stepped into that meadow. And it wasn't finished. We drove until dawn, the road stretching endlessly ahead. Eventually, exhaustion forced us to pull over at a rest stop by a wide, empty field. I parked far from the few other vehicles and killed the engine. Erin sat silently beside me, her skin pale, her eyes glassy. "Maybe it's in our heads," I said, though the words felt hollow the moment I spoke them. She shook her head slowly. "No, it's in our shadows." The truth of it settled over me like ice. We didn't sleep. We just sat there, watching the sunlight creep over the field, waiting for something to happen. And for a while, nothing did. The shadows beneath our feet looked almost normal in the midday sun, though I couldn't shake the feeling they were playing along, pretending. By afternoon, Erin insisted on walking. "If we don't move, we'll lose ourselves completely," she said. Her voice was weak, but there was a determination in her eyes I hadn't seen in days. We walked along the field, the grass tall around our knees. For a brief moment, it felt ordinary, like we were just two people stretching our legs on a road trip. But then, as we turned back toward the RV, I noticed something that froze me in place. Our shadows weren't facing the same direction we were. We were walking toward the RV. They were walking away from it. "Erin," I whispered, but she had already seen it. We both stopped. Our shadows stopped too, frozen in mid-step, their backs turned to us. The air grew heavy, the kind of pressure you feel before lightning splits the sky. Then, in perfect synchronization, our shadows turned their heads, not their bodies, just their heads, back toward us. The sight buckled something inside me. My legs gave out, and I dropped to the grass, clutching at the earth like it might hold me in place. Erin fell beside me, shaking. "They're not us anymore," she whispered. "They're not us." We scrambled back to the RV, slamming the doors shut, drawing every curtain as though that could make a difference. I wanted to drive again, to keep fleeing, but deep down I knew it didn't matter. You can't outrun what's inside your own skin. That night we tried to stay awake, but exhaustion claimed us, and when sleep came, so did the dream. This time, we were both in it. I knew it because when I jolted awake, Erin was already sitting up, tears streaming down her face. "We were in the meadow," she said, her voice shaking. "And they were waiting." I nodded, my throat dry. I saw it too. The dream had been vivid, clearer than reality. Our shadows stood at the edge of the field, side by side, taller, darker, their forms sharper than ours. They only watched. And though they didn't speak, I understood what they were telling us. They were patient. They weren't leaving. Not until we did. The days blurred after that. We tried to convince ourselves the sunlight meant safety, that daylight could keep the strange weight pressing down on us at bay. But it was a lie we could only cling to for so long. Every morning, when the sun hit the windows just right, we could see them, our shadows standing there in sharper focus than they should have been. While every other object in the RV threw faint, softened outlines, ours were always solid, defined, watching us. Erin stopped looking at mirrors altogether. She couldn't bear the thought of catching something in the reflection that wasn't her. I tried to keep busy, checking tires, adjusting the generator, pretending to have control over things. But no matter how much I busied my hands, my mind was never free. Every task ended with me glancing down and seeing the same thing. A shadow that lagged just slightly, not quite in step, like it was testing how far it could wander before I noticed. On the third night at that rest stop, the waiting broke. I dozed off in the driver's seat, the hum of a passing semi fading in my ears, when I woke to the sound of quiet breathing. Not Erin's, hers was uneven, ragged in her sleep. This was deeper, deliberate, inches from my ear. I whipped around, flashlight in hand, shining it across the cabin. Nothing. Just the familiar cramped walls, curtains drawn tight. Then I realized the beam had caught something on the far wall. A shadow, my shadow. But I wasn't moving. It was. Slowly, its chest rose and fell in rhythm with that breath I had heard. "Erin," I hissed, my voice cracking. She stirred, eyes opening groggily. "What?" I didn't answer. I just shone the light at the wall, my hand shaking. She followed the beam, and when she saw, she bolted upright with a strangled cry. Both our shadows stood there, clear as day against the wall of the RV, even though the flashlight should have been throwing them at a completely different angle. They weren't bound to us anymore, and worse, they were closer to each other than we were. Almost touching. I killed the flashlight, plunging us into suffocating darkness. Immediately I regretted it, because in that dark I could still see them, clearer than ever. They didn't need light anymore. Erin's nails dug into my arm. "We have to go. Now." I didn't argue. I slammed the RV into gear, pulling back onto the highway. The night swallowed us whole, the road stretching out like a vein in the earth. For miles, neither of us spoke, too afraid that words might invite them further in. But silence only gave space for the other sound, the faint scrape of movement. From the back of the RV, soft but unmistakable, like feet dragging slowly across linoleum. "Don't look," Erin whispered. Her voice was desperate, almost pleading. "Don't turn around." I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The urge to glance back was unbearable, but every part of me knew what I'd see. Something standing in the narrow aisle between the bunks. Something that wasn't bound to our steps anymore. The scraping came closer. One slow step at a time. I floored it, the RV rattling dangerously as it barreled forward. The sound didn't stop. It was inside with us, pacing forward, patient, inevitable. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. I didn't dare ease off the gas. I drove until the horizon bruised with the first hint of dawn. Only when the light spilled over the landscape did the heaviness in the air lift, the sense of presence fading. But Erin didn't relax. She sat rigid, staring at the floor, whispering to herself. "What are you saying?" I asked. Her lips trembled as she repeated it louder. "They're practicing. They're learning how to be us." The words gutted me, because I'd felt it too. The subtle delay of movement, the way their heads tilted when ours didn't, the rhythm of their breathing. It wasn't mimicry anymore. It was rehearsal. That morning, desperate and half delirious, I drove us to the nearest campground I could find. It was a small, almost forgotten place off a service road, ringed by trees that looked skeletal against the brightening sky. There were no other campers, no ranger station, just an empty lot of gravel and picnic tables warped from weather. I parked, shut off the engine, and sat there in silence. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Erin finally turned to me, her face pale, her eyes hollow. "We can't keep running. They'll always be with us." I wanted to argue, to promise her we'd find a way, but the words wouldn't come, because she was right. Whatever had attached itself to us back in that meadow wasn't tied to a place anymore. It was tied to us. That night, we decided to face it, not by choice, but because we had no choice left. We sat outside the RV by the picnic table, a lantern casting a small circle of light around us. The woods loomed silent, branches creaking faintly in the wind. We didn't talk much. Words felt fragile against what we were about to confront. Then it happened. The lantern flickered, dimmed, then flared too bright, throwing long shapes across the gravel. And there they were. Our shadows, not on the ground where they should have been, but standing across from us, just at the edge of the lantern's glow. Upright. Still. They looked like us, but wrong. Their proportions too thin, their heads angled at strange degrees. And though their faces were just darkness, I swore I felt their eyes burning into us. Erin's breath hitched. "What do we do?" I couldn't answer. My heart hammered, my throat locked. All I knew was that they were closer than ever. And this time they weren't waiting. One of them stepped forward. The gravel crunched beneath feet that weren't supposed to exist. Erin screamed, stumbling back against the RV. I stood frozen, the lantern flickering between us, casting their forms sharper and sharper until it felt like they weren't shadows anymore, just hollow, empty versions of ourselves crawling into the world. And then the lantern went out. The darkness swallowed everything. And in that darkness, I felt something brush against my arm. Cold, weightless, but undeniable. It wasn't Erin. When the lantern blinked out, the silence pressed in so thick I could hear my own pulse. The night wasn't empty. It was dense, like something filled it from all sides. Erin clutched my sleeve in the dark, trembling, her breath coming fast and shallow. I reached into my pocket, fumbling for the flashlight. My fingers brushed it once, then froze. Because I felt another hand there. It wasn't Erin's. It was colder, thinner. It wrapped over my knuckles just long enough to make sure I knew it was real before slipping away. I yanked my hand back with a shout, the flashlight clattering onto the gravel. The sound broke the silence like shattering glass. Erin dove for it, clicking it on with a desperate snap. The beam shot out, slicing across the dark. And there they were. not just shapes anymore. Our shadows stood upright, separated from us by only a few feet. The flashlight should have thrown them somewhere behind us, tethered to our own bodies. But they weren't. They were freestanding, like they'd been cut out of us and stitched into the night. The one that looked like me tilted its head, mimicking the way I'd flinched seconds earlier. The motion wasn't exact. It was slower, more deliberate, like it was studying how fear moved through my body. The one shaped like Erin stepped forward. Its foot crunched the gravel in perfect time with hers, though she hadn't moved. Erin screamed, stumbling backward until her shoulder hit the RV door. They're not even pretending anymore, she gasped. The flashlight beam jittered as her hands shook. I forced myself to stand in front of her, even though my legs felt like water. The shadows didn't advance. Not yet. They just waited. You want something? I shouted, my voice cracking. What do you want from us? The silence that followed was unbearable. No answer, no movement, just the feeling that they were closer than the light showed. Then my shadow moved. It lifted its arm, slowly, deliberately, like it was raising a mirror to me, and before I could stop myself, I realized I was lifting my arm too. Not by choice. My body was following it, not the other way around. I dropped it, staggering, gasping like I'd been yanked on strings. They're pulling, I whispered, horrified. They're not copies anymore. They're in us. Erin sobbed, clicking the flashlight off and back on again like maybe the beam itself was broken. But every time the light flared back, the shadows were closer. Just a little. Not by walking. By blinking forward like they existed in a frame we couldn't see and we were catching them every few seconds in the wrong place. They want to wear us, Erin said suddenly. Her voice was quiet, trembling but certain. Like skin. That's why they're practicing. They're not just following, they're trying to step inside. The words chilled me more than the sight of them, because it was true. I could feel it. The weight in my chest, the pull in my muscles. Like if I gave in for even a second, I'd never be the one steering this body again. Something in me snapped. I grabbed the lantern, shaking it until the flame sputtered back to life. The circle of light pushed them back, faint but undeniable, like the brightness was corrosive. Inside, I barked at Erin, shoving her toward the RV door. We scrambled in, slamming the lock behind us. The lantern flickered on the table, barely holding the dark at bay. But the moment the door shut, I knew we hadn't left them outside. Because when I glanced at the far wall, two shadows were already there. Standing, waiting. I staggered back, my heart thundering. Erin covered her face with her hands, sobbing into her palms. We can't run, she whispered. They're already here. The lantern dimmed again, weaker and weaker, and I felt the cold brush of something passing behind me, like walking through a draft, except it carried the weight of eyes, of intent. I spun, swinging wildly at empty air. Nothing. But in the wall's corner, the shadow that looked like me raised its hand again, curling its fingers into a fist, and my own hand clenched tight in perfect response. I couldn't stop it. The terror wasn't just that they were outside anymore, it was that they were inside too. Every movement I made was being tugged at, tested, rehearsed. Erin, I said hoarsely, not daring to take my eyes off the wall. We're running out of time. She lowered her hands, her eyes red and hollow. What do you mean? I swallowed hard. I mean, the longer we fight, the more they learn. And one night, we're going to close our eyes, and when we wake up, it won't be us opening them. Her face crumpled at the words. She shook her head violently, whispering, no, 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 over and over. But deep down, we both knew we weren't just being haunted, we were being replaced. We didn't sleep that night. Not really. The lantern sputtered until dawn, and every time it dimmed, we panicked like drowning animals, rushing to pump it back to life. But dawn didn't bring relief. When the sun finally cut through the blinds, it didn't scatter the shadows like I'd hoped. They lingered in the corners, faint but wrong, darker than anything else in the room. Erin refused to move for hours. She sat at the dinette with her knees pulled to her chest, rocking slowly like a child. I kept pacing, trying to convince myself that daylight meant safety. But every time I passed the window, I caught sight of something that made my stomach twist. Our reflections didn't quite keep up. They lagged by half a beat, watching us with a patience that felt infinite. Around noon, Erin finally spoke, her voice raw. "We have to leave, now. Burn gas until we're empty. Just keep driving." I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to. But when I pictured us on the road, I didn't see freedom. I saw the same things sitting in the back of the RV, invisible until the next time the sun dipped. "They'll come with us," I muttered. "It's not the campground. It's us. They've latched on." Her lips trembled. "So what then? Just wait until they finish?" The words hung heavy, because she wasn't wrong. That's what it felt like we were cattle being fattened for slaughter. We argued. For hours we argued. Drive, run, scream for help, though we both knew no one was coming. Every possibility ended the same way, with the shadows standing closer than before. By dusk, Erin's rocking had slowed. Her eyes were glassy, her face pale. "It's tonight," she whispered, like she'd been told by someone I couldn't hear. "They're done waiting." The weight of her words pressed into my bones. I tried to keep the lantern lit, but even at full pump, its flame was thin, guttering like a candle on its last breath. The air in the RV felt thick, heavy with something that wasn't oxygen. At some point in the night, I must have dozed. Not real sleep, just that exhausted blur when your body shuts down in self-defense. And that's when I heard it. Not from outside, not from the walls, from my own throat. A low, guttural laugh. Except it wasn't mine. I snapped awake, clutching my chest, choking on silence. Erin stirred on the bench, her eyes fluttering open. "Did you?" She stopped, her words catching, because the laugh came again, this time from her. But her lips didn't move. I scrambled back, horror clawing at my insides as the sound rose and fell, weaving between us. It wasn't mockery, it was joy, the kind of joy that comes from something finally getting what it's waited for. The lantern sputtered and went out completely. We were plunged into a dark so complete it felt solid, pressing against my skin. And in that instant, I realized something worse than any shadow outside. I couldn't tell where my body ended anymore. I lifted my hand and felt my fingers brush my face, but the shape was wrong. Too long, too thin. "Erin!" I screamed, but even my voice wasn't mine. It came out hollow, doubled, like someone else was speaking through me. I staggered for the lantern, clawing in the dark, but another hand found it first. My hand, or something that wore it better than I did. The flame burst to life for a second, just long enough to show me what I already knew. They weren't trying to step into us. They already had. Erin's face stared back at me across the table, but her eyes were black pits, empty and endless. She opened her mouth and my own voice came out. Perfect. Mocking. I stumbled back, crashing into the door, fumbling at the lock. My body wasn't listening, lagging half a second behind like I was already the shadow. And in that half second, I knew. This wasn't a fight I could win. It was a question of which version of me got to keep walking. I don't remember unlocking the RV door. One moment I was pressed against it, lungs tearing with every breath, vision warping like the world was underwater. The next, I was outside, barefoot in the dirt, stumbling into the open like a man trying to escape his own skin. The night swallowed me whole. The campground was silent, the kind of silence that feels staged. My footsteps crunched too loudly, too slowly, and even that sound seemed borrowed. Behind me, the RV door swung wide, and I stepped out. Same frame, same shirt, same stubble on the jaw. But it wasn't me. It moved smoother, too fluid. Like a predator finally stretching after a long crouch. Its head tilted, eyes hollow and gleaming with something that didn't belong to this earth. "Going somewhere?" It asked, my voice, my cadence, but deeper, richer. I backed away, hands trembling so badly I could hardly balance. "You're not," I smiled. The one I'd used in photos, in jokes, in moments that had been mine and mine alone. "I'm better," it said. I turned and ran. The dirt lot blurred beneath me, shadows clinging to my heels, but every stride felt like dragging chains. My own body was betraying me, slow to respond, heavy in ways it hadn't been yesterday. I tripped, fell to my knees, palms grinding into gravel. When I looked up, The trees loomed like sentinels, their branches reaching down, waiting to claim me. Behind me, he walked calmly. No rush, no fear. Every step was measured, inevitable. "You've always known," he called. "That weak place inside. That part of you that doubts, that second guesses, that lets fear eat you alive. I just filled it. I just made it useful." His words carved through me because they weren't wrong. That voice in my head, the one that had made me hesitate, that had made me rationalize every warning sign until it was too late, wasn't gone. It had just been given flesh. I staggered to my feet and pushed into the trees, branches tearing at my arms, needles scraping skin. The forest closed in, thick and endless, though I knew it was only a sliver of wilderness beyond the campground. But the dark bent the world, stretched it. Every path looked the same, twisting me in circles. And still I heard him. Walking, not running. Close but never rushing. I broke into a clearing, my chest heaving. The moonlight revealed the pond at the edge of the campground, the same pond where I'd filled our water tank days before, never thinking twice about its depth or what it reflected. Now it looked like glass, too still, too black. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like instinct cut through the panic. Water. Reflections. Shadows only exist because of light. If he was a shadow, then maybe here I could strip him away. I stumbled to the bank, dropping to my knees, and forced myself to look into the water. My reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, trembling, cracked at the edges. But behind me, he stood perfectly clear. Not warped by the ripples, not dulled by the dark. He crouched just over my shoulder, grinning into the pond like it was a mirror built for him alone. "You can't outrun yourself," he whispered. I plunged my hands into the freezing water and splashed it over my face. Cold bit into my skin, stinging, but it wasn't enough. His reflection only smiled wider. So I leaned forward and forced my head under. The shock stole my breath, drove knives into my skull. I pressed my face deeper, holding it there, waiting for something, anything to change. And for a second, it worked. The water went still. His reflection wavered, blurred, fractured. But then hands grabbed the back of my head. My hands. Too strong, too certain. They shoved me deeper, forcing me down until water filled my nose, my throat, my lungs. "This is what you wanted," he hissed. His voice vibrated through the pond itself, rippling through me. "To give in, to stop fighting. Let me carry it. Let me carry you." I thrashed, clawed at my own wrists, bubbles exploding from my mouth. Every instinct screamed to surrender, to let the darkness fill me. The water pressed tighter, colder, until I couldn't tell if I was still alive. And then something flickered. Not in him. In me. I remembered Erin's face, pale and broken in the lantern light. I remembered her whisper, "It's tonight." And I realized if I gave up now, there wouldn't be anyone left to fight for her. She'd already been slipping, already been claimed. Maybe I couldn't save myself, but maybe I could save her. With the last shreds of strength in me, I wrenched my head sideways, breaking free of his grip, gasping into the night air. I staggered back from the pond, choking, coughing water from my lungs. My chest burned, but I was still me. He stood on the bank, dripping though he hadn't touched the water. His smile faltered for the first time. "You can't hold on forever," he said softly. I wiped my mouth, shaking, every muscle screaming. "Then I'll hold on as long as it takes." The forest seemed to inhale around us, the night pressing tighter. His form wavered at the edges, flickering like a flame in the wind. And I understood then, he wasn't all-powerful. He wasn't unstoppable. He was only as strong as the darkness I gave him, which meant the fight wasn't about running. It was about refusing. Refusing every whisper, every doubt, every piece of me that wanted to quit. I stumbled back toward the RV, the weight of him trailing close behind, but for the first time, I felt a sliver of space between us. A margin. A choice. And as I reached the edge of the clearing, I heard Erin's voice in the dark, not calling for me, calling as me, and I knew the real battle was waiting inside. Her voice stopped me cold. It wasn't just that she was speaking with my voice, it was the way she laughed with it. A hollow, playful tone that didn't belong to either of us. I stood in the tree line, breath ragged, staring at the RV where the sound came from. Its windows glowed faintly with that yellow light again. Not lantern, not bulb. A warmth that didn't comfort but warned. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My body screamed to turn and vanish into the forest, to walk until the road took me anywhere else. But the thought of leaving her in there, letting them finish what they'd started, that was worse than dying. So I stepped forward. Each footfall sounded too loud on the dirt. The RV loomed taller with every step, its metal skin gleaming faintly in the moonlight like something alive, breathing. The closer I got, the more wrong it looked, angles sharper than they should have been, door slightly too tall, windows stretched thin like eyes, and through them I could see her silhouette, sitting at the little dinette, perfectly still. I climbed the steps, my hand hovered over the handle, trembling. Then her voice, my voice, spoke again, soft and coaxing. You know what happens if you come in. You've felt it. You've seen it. It's not hers anymore. It's ours. You'll only join her. I swallowed hard. Maybe, I whispered more to myself than to them, but I'm not leaving her. I pulled the door open. The smell hit first, musty, metallic, sweet like spoiled fruit. It filled my lungs, clung to my clothes. The glow inside was thicker, almost liquid, coating every surface with a sticky sheen of gold. And there she was. Erin sat upright, hands folded on the table, eyes glassy and distant, but her face, it wasn't still, it shifted. Her cheeks tightening, then slackening, her lips tugging into a smile that wasn't hers. Her skin seemed thinner, almost translucent, shadows crawling underneath. When she looked at me, it wasn't her eyes. They were too dark, too wide. You came back, she said in my voice, perfectly mimicked, every cadence exact. The sound turned my stomach. Erin, I whispered, it's me. You're still in there. You have to fight it. Her head tilted slowly, bird-like. A ripple passed through her features, almost like another face pushing to the surface. My face. And then she laughed. You think you're fighting for her, the thing said through her mouth. But she's gone. All that's left is the shell. I just wear it now. The glow pulsed, stronger, bending the walls of the RV like heat haze. The air pressed against me, thick, humming. I felt it claw at the edges of my mind, whispering how easy it would be to give up, to stop resisting, to join. I staggered, clutching the wall. Don't you see? The voice continued. There's no winning. You're just delaying what already belongs to me. You'll wear yourself down piece by piece until there's nothing left. And for a terrifying second, I believed it. I felt the weight of exhaustion in my bones, the despair that had been chewing at me since this nightmare. Maybe they were right. Maybe I'd only ever been delaying. But then, my eyes caught Erin's hand. Just a flicker, a twitch, not the smooth, puppet-like movements the thing had made her perform all night, but something clumsy, human. She was still in there. I stepped closer, forcing my voice steady, even as the air trembled. Erin, listen to me. You told me once, when things were hard, you told me the only way to make it through was to hold on, no matter how small the grip. Her eyes flickered. The shadow's smile faltered. You don't get to use her words, it hissed. I leaned over the table, close enough to see my own face swimming beneath her skin, pressing outward. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to her. For a heartbeat, silence. Then her lips parted, and it wasn't my voice anymore. It was hers, weak, fragile. Help me. The thing roared through her, a sound that shook the walls, but I seized her shoulders, gripping hard. The glow flared, blinding, shadows writhing over every surface. My own reflection stared back at me from the oven door, the window glass, the chrome handle of the fridge. Dozens of me, all grinning, all watching. Let go, they hissed in unison. You can't save her. You can't even save yourself. But I held tighter, pulling her toward me, even as her skin burned like ice, even as something inside tried to force me back. Erin, I shouted over the roar. It only wins if we stop fighting. Don't let it tell you who you are. Don't let me tell you who you are. You're stronger than this. Her body convulsed, the glow flaring to a painful white. For an instant, every reflection screamed, mouths wide, eyes black. And then, silence. The light collapsed inward, vanishing like a flame snuffed out. We both crashed to the floor. I gasped, clutching her as she trembled in my arms. Her eyes were still clouded, but they were hers. Tears streaked her face, and she clung to me weakly, like she was afraid I'd disappear. "It's not gone," she whispered hoarsely. "It's waiting." I nodded, throat tight. I could still feel it too, circling at the edges of my mind, waiting for the moment we faltered. Maybe it would never leave. Maybe it was part of us now. But for tonight, we were still here. And that had to be enough. We stayed on the floor of that RV for what felt like hours, not moving, just breathing. Every shadow looked too thick, every creak of the cooling metal too deliberate. I didn't dare close my eyes. Erin's fingers dug into my sleeve like an anchor. I could feel the tremors in her body, a rhythm of fear that matched my own. She kept whispering the same thing over and over, a broken mantra. "It's still here. It's still here." Her voice was so raw it barely sounded like her anymore. And she was right. Even though the glow had gone, even though the walls looked solid again, the RV didn't feel empty. The silence wasn't relief. It was waiting. A silence that knew something. A silence that carried teeth. I pulled her upright, careful not to let go of her hand. "We can't stay in here," I said, my throat dry. "It wants us to. That's how it wins." She nodded shakily, but her eyes darted to the window. The night outside looked different. Too dark, too still, could barely make out the trees, though I knew they were just yards away. The glass didn't reflect our faces anymore, only a faint shimmer, as if something was standing behind us, just out of view. Every instinct screamed at me to run. I eased the door open. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and grounding. I sucked it in like water, dragging Erin down the steps with me. The earth crunched underfoot. Real. Solid. But as soon as we stepped off the RV, I noticed something wrong. The forest wasn't making a sound. No insects, no wind, not even the distant hum of the highway. Just silence so heavy it pressed against my chest. We started walking. Each step forward felt like pushing through something thick and invisible. The trees loomed too tall, their branches like fingers overhead. I kept expecting the glow to return, or worse, for the RV door to slam and lock itself, trapping us inside forever. But it didn't. It just sat there in the clearing, hulking and still, like a predator that had already fed. We reached the tree line and pressed deeper into the woods. Erin clung to me, her breaths ragged. And then I noticed our shadows. The moon had broken through the clouds above us, faint silver light spilling across the forest floor. My shadow stretched long ahead of me, tall and thin. Erin's shadow clung beside it, but something was off. They didn't move right. When I lifted my arm, mine followed a beat too late. Erin's shadow flickered, shuddered, like it was struggling against something unseen. And then, God, hers grew taller than her body, stretching up the trunk of a tree, face distorting into something not hers. "Don't look at it," I whispered, dragging her forward, though my own eyes burned to turn. The farther we walked, the worse it got. Every step made our shadows lag more, ripple more, like they weren't attached to us anymore, but trying to pull free. By the time we reached the dirt road leading back to the highway, Erin was sobbing. Her voice cracked as she begged me to stop. "We can't leave it," she said, her words tumbling out in panic. "If we walk away, it'll just follow us. It'll never stop." I gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet my eyes. "Listen to me. That's what it wants, to keep us looking back, to keep us tied to it. The only way we survive is if we don't give it our fear anymore." She stared at me, tears glistening in the moonlight. For a second, I thought she'd collapse. But then, slowly, she nodded. We turned toward the road, and as we did, I couldn't help myself. I looked back. The RV stood there, small in the clearing, silent. Its windows reflected the moonlight now, not the glow. For a moment, I almost believed it was just a machine again, just steel and rubber and fiberglass. But then I saw it. Our shadows hadn't followed us. They were still there, standing at the edge of the clearing, side by side, long and tall in the moonlight, perfect copies, watching us, and slowly, too slowly, they lifted their hands and waved. We didn't stop walking, not when the highway finally appeared, not when the distant glow of headlights cut through the dark, not even when we flagged down a passing trucker who pulled over. eyes wide at the sight of us. We climbed into his cab, wordless. He asked what had happened, where our RV was. Neither of us answered. Because how do you explain to someone that the thing you lost wasn't an RV? It was a piece of yourself. I kept my eyes fixed on the passing trees, terrified that any second I'd see two shadows pacing alongside us, waiting for the right moment to fall back into step. It's been months since that night. We never went back for the RV. Left everything inside, gear, clothes, keepsakes. I even left the journals I'd kept for years, memories I thought I couldn't live without. None of it mattered anymore. Because sometimes when I'm walking home after dark, I see it. Not always. Not every night. But enough to know. The streetlights cast my shadow long on the sidewalk, my footsteps echoing in time. And then, just faintly, just enough to make my skin crawl, I'll notice it takes a beat too long to follow. And somewhere inside, I know the truth. It's still waiting. I tried, in the weeks that followed, to pretend it hadn't happened. That night became a story I told myself differently every morning. Some mornings I convinced myself we'd both hallucinated it, maybe from exhaustion, maybe from carbon monoxide in the RV. Other mornings I believed we'd stumbled into some strange local ritual, a trick of mirrors or lights, but the body remembers what the mind tries to erase. I still woke up choking on silence, the kind that pressed too close against my ears. I still found myself glancing down at the sidewalk when I walked after dusk, checking the rhythm of my shadow. Sometimes it moved with me. Sometimes it didn't. Erin didn't handle it much better. She stopped talking for a while. She'd stare at her hands as if they didn't belong to her, twisting them over and over. When I asked what she was thinking, she'd just shake her head, lips pressed shut like if she spoke, the thing might hear her. One night I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, the blinds wide open, staring at her reflection in the window. She didn't even look up when I came in. "It blinks wrong," she whispered. Her voice was flat, but her body trembled like a trapped animal. "What do you mean?" I asked, sitting beside her, though I already knew. She tilted her head toward the glass. "Watch long enough. You'll see it." I couldn't bring myself to. Not that night. Not then. We tried to keep living. We picked up a used car from a lot 2 towns over. I went back to work. She tried to. But everything had shifted. Camping, our thing, the ritual that kept us grounded, the way we'd learned to breathe outside of deadlines and noise, was gone. We didn't talk about it, but the silence where it used to be sat heavy. I missed it like a limb, and yet I couldn't imagine setting foot in another RV lot. Couldn't imagine standing under another awning with that forced smile of possibility, because I knew deep down that whatever had looked out from that RV wasn't trapped there. It was patient. It had slipped into us. I carried it every day. The first time it happened in daylight, I was walking across a parking lot after work. The sun was setting, bright and golden, throwing shadows across the asphalt. I was alone, or thought I was. Then I noticed it. My shadow stopped. I kept walking 5 steps ahead before I realized. I froze, the weight of the world pinning me to that blacktop. Slowly, mechanically, my shadow caught up, stretching and snapping back into place beneath me. I didn't tell Erin. How could I? Her nights were already haunted. Her sleep was shallow, broken by muttered words and sudden jerks of her body, as if she was trying to climb out of her own skin. If I told her what I'd seen, it might shatter what little ground she still stood on. So I kept it inside, and in that silence, it grew. Sometimes when I closed my eyes, I could hear that RV door creak. Sometimes I'd catch the faintest scent of mildew and burnt wiring, even when I was miles from anything mechanical. Once, I swore I heard faint knocking against the walls of my own home. Steady, patient, 3 slow taps that echoed in my chest. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew. It wasn't just in the RV. It had followed us out. Weeks turned into months, but the tension didn't fade. It thickened, like fog that refused to burn off. I noticed how Erin had started checking her reflection more often, in windows, in mirrors, in the black glass of her phone. Watching, always watching. One night, she caught me staring at her. "What?" she asked, her voice sharp. I hesitated. Then, too tired to lie, I said, "I'm afraid you're not going to come back one of these times." Her face broke, the kind of break that isn't dramatic but quiet and final, like glass slipping off a table and shattering before you can catch it. She didn't answer, just turned away, shoulders shaking. And I understood then that whatever it wasn't done with us. I wish I could tell you this ends with closure, that we figured out what it wanted or where it came from or how to fight it. But the truth is uglier. There is no closure, only a question that follows me everywhere. What part of me did I leave behind in that clearing? And if that part is still standing there, watching, waving, then what exactly made it back with me? The last time I camped, if you can call it that, I wasn't in an RV. I wasn't even in the woods. I drove out to the edge of town one night, parked by a field, and sat on the hood of the car. I thought maybe if I sat with it, if I faced it, it would loosen its grip. The field was quiet, the stars faint through the haze of town lights. My shadow stretched across the dirt, long and straight. I stared at it until my eyes ached, and then it shifted. It didn't copy me, it stood. Just stood, like a figure separate from my body. And in that instant, I understood something I wish I didn't. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was waiting for me. Waiting for the moment I stopped resisting. Waiting for the moment I let myself fall into its rhythm. And I know, one day, I will. That's the truth of fear no one tells you. It doesn't always chase. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what runs at you from the dark. It's what stands perfectly still in the corner of your vision, patient as stone, knowing you'll come to it eventually. And the cruelest part? When it happens, when that moment comes, no one else will notice. They'll see me walking, talking, smiling, but I'll know because my shadow will take longer to return. The night I realized it wasn't going to leave me alone, I was sitting in the living room with every light on. Erin was asleep in the bedroom, or pretending to be. She'd been quieter lately, like her voice was pulling further and further away, deeper into some place I couldn't follow. I sat on the couch staring at the blank TV screen. My reflection looked back at me, tired, hollow, but still me. For a long time, I almost convinced myself it was fine. Then it blinked. I hadn't. My breath caught, my chest tightening like a vice. I didn't move. Neither did it. For one long moment, we stared at each other, my reflection and me, the living and the waiting. And then it smiled. I didn't. I ran. Out the door, into the street, barefoot and stupid. The pavement bit into my soles, but I didn't care. I just needed distance. I didn't know from what or to where, only that I couldn't stay inside. The air outside was cold, sharp. Streetlights hummed, casting long shadows down the asphalt. My own stretched in front of me, crooked by the angle of the lamps, and I swear, God, I swear, it turned its head toward me. Not in a flicker, not in a trick of light. Slowly, deliberately, it craned its head back, meeting my eyes. I stopped breathing, because this wasn't just a haunting. This wasn't random. It wanted me to see. When I finally stumbled back inside, shaking, Erin was sitting upright in bed. She looked at me like she already knew. "You saw it too," she said softly. Her voice cracked like old wood. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She nodded, eyes glassy. "It's not going away, is it?" I sat beside her, the mattress sinking. My hands trembled, so I pressed them against my knees, forcing stillness. "No," I whispered, "it's not." She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just lay back down, turned her face to the wall, and said, "Then maybe we shouldn't run." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Her words spun around in my skull until they took root. Maybe we shouldn't run. Maybe that was what it wanted, for us to finally stop pretending, stop resisting, and look it full in the face. It was madness. But what was sanity anymore, when my own reflection moved on its own, when shadows disobeyed? So I made a choice. I went back. It was almost exactly a year after that night in the campground. The lot was overgrown now, weeds rising through cracks in the pavement, the burned RVs still stare like tombstones, blackened shells against the tree line. And at the edge of it all, untouched, sat the RV. Our RV. The door hung slightly open, swaying gently though there was no wind. I approached slowly, heart pounding. Each step was a drumbeat in my skull. I expected something to lunge, some sudden violence, but the silence was worse. I climbed the steps and stood in the doorway. Inside, everything was as we'd left it. The smell of mildew and ash clung to the air, heavy and wet. My skin prickled. The reflection glass where I'd first seen it was dark now, almost black. I stared into it. At first, I only saw myself, tired, older, thinner, a survivor of something no one else would ever believe. Then it shifted. The face in the glass straightened, smoothed, smiled. It lifted its hand, my hand, and waved. Slow, patient. I didn't move. I couldn't. And then, for the first time, I lifted mine in return. The glass rippled, like water. Something pressed against the inside, testing the surface, stretching it thin. Not a hand, not exactly. The shape was wrong, fingers too long, wrist bent too sharply, but it was close enough to make my stomach turn. The air in the RV grew heavy, set thick like smoke. My lungs burned, but I couldn't back away. Because in that moment, I understood. This wasn't an enemy. It was a replacement. It wasn't here to chase me. It was here to wait until I chose to step through. And I realized maybe I already had. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember the drive home. I just remember waking up in bed the next morning, staring at the ceiling. Erin lay beside me, but her breathing was strange, too steady, too even. I turned my head. Her eyes were open, fixed on me. She smiled, and when she blinked, only one of us did. I've stopped fighting. The days pass in a blur, work and food and meaningless routines, but I know what's waiting at the edges. I see it in mirrors, in windows, in the faces of people I pass on the street who don't quite move right, whose shadows don't quite line up. They're everywhere. And maybe that's the real horror. Not that I'm haunted, not that I'm marked, but that this world is already hollowed out, that most of the people walking past you aren't even people anymore. You just haven't watched long enough to notice. But I have. And soon, very soon, so will you. Because when it finally decides it's time, when it steps out from behind your reflection, you won't scream. You'll wave. Just like I did.